Hello, and welcome back to Zenin Fanfics. Today we're starting part 48 of an exciting series. What if Villain Deku became a teacher at U.A? If you enjoy this video, please like and subscribe for more content. The story we're featuring is written by Bloomerbill on Fanfiction.net. You can find all the relevant links in the description, so be sure to check out the author's profile and say hello. Now let's dive into the story. Yuchi sighed as he sat upon his throne, along with many of the others, bar N, who had volunteered to watch over the Ninths first. Today had been a rather tiring day for the Vestiges. There were admittedly some nerves between them all at the idea of there being two holders and what light it might bring to them if they were successful in being passed down to two people at the same time. Most worrisome was the idea that they would only be with one of the two, but the other would have the quirk as well, meaning they were only copies of the people they thought they were, or perhaps worse, have only some of them there in the main area, and the others gone. Perhaps it said something about Yuchi and the others that they were more worried about being even partially separated instead of being some clone mind of a dead person. Regardless, they all held their breath once it came time to be transferred on. They knew it had happened. The second inheritance had begun to accept the new holder. The world began to shift as it always did. There was always a change to the air as a new person's thoughts and memories started to become part of their collective unconsciousness. Admittedly, this time, it was even more strongly felt as the rush of two open minds joined their own. Then for the first time in years, they all heard something that was not their own voices or from the ears of their current holder. The crash of waves against each other. They all watched with amazement, when where once was even more of the empty void beneath them was an endless ocean stretching as far as any of them could see. Two shades barely seen under the water. Well, I think everyone lost the bet on what their spaces would look like, Banjo commented at the time, one of his hands coming up to rub at his forehead as they all stared. Indeed, no one had bet on them sharing a space if the two became holders, nor the idea of the two sharing the large sea that became a part of their shared mind space. They didn't allow it to distract them for long and returned to looking through Yagi's eyes to see how the kids were doing. And as they expected, both of them were affected by the lull. Lull was probably a far too innocent word for having one's whole body rewriting itself from the cellular level. But frankly, it wasn't as painful as it sounded either. More like their bodies were being lulled to sleep, with the tug being stronger with each quirk added to the mix. So, it was almost expected when both Hado and Amajiki's eyes fluttered and the two of them had trouble keeping their heads up, Amajiki handling the changes a bit better than Hado since his body was more used to this. But then both of them fainted at the same time. Everyone had been rightfully worried since none of them had expected the lull to actually make them pass out all the way, but Yuchi was quick to get everyone to calm down with the help of Yagi, sending Nana to check on the pair, since she was the most familiar with her quirk and the closest in line with Yagi's still awake. They had all expected much resistance from her entering the ninth space, but to their great surprise, Nana was easily able to slip between the waves and found both of the half-formed vestiges beneath the waves. With Nana returning just seconds before the two had woken from their sudden nap and explained what had happened to them. They were pushing their minds too far too soon. Nana told Yagi, their vestiges aren't solid enough to leave their space, but they were trying. I had to calm them both down and get them settled in their own space. Nana further told them, and they all had left it at the time so they could focus on the kids until Yagi and the others were shooed from the infirmary. They already have vestiges. That usually takes a month to form the wispy shadow. Hikage brought up, I think that might be Amajiki's quirk speeding up the process. His quirk is all about adaptation to new genes, so he would be settling faster than most of us. Yuchi suggested, getting nods from the others. Okay, but what about Hado? She wouldn't be adapting as fast as Amajiki unless she had his quirk too, and they got inheritance separately, so he couldn't have given her his quirk. Bruce countered, his arms crossed. I don't know. Yuchi admitted, letting his head hang. There was a lot he didn't know or understand about his own quirk. Knowing how his quirk worked beyond how it was passed on and the effects it had on the current user was usually swept aside for more important things, like surviving against his brother and helping the current user as much as they could. Maybe Junior will have some idea. Mind asking him eighth? Bruce asked. Yagi nodded and went to find Midoriya for them. Dr. Midoriya, the vestiges wanted to get your opinion on something. Yagi informed the boy, after waiting for him to finish speaking with Nizu. Midoriya hummed an acknowledgement and motioned to Nizu they would talk more later, moving to speak with them somewhere more private. Yes, Midoriya asked them. We've spoken about how it roughly takes a year for the new holders to be able to enter the shared mind space before. Hikage said with Yagi, quoting him from Midoriya. Yes, is Amajiki's vestige forming faster than expected? Midoriya guessed. Junior once again proves he's Yuchi's eldritch child. Bruce said with a teasing look over at him. Yuchi made and threw a pillow at Bruce, the man quickly flipping him off in return. You need to accept your son is an eldritch terror, Yuchi. Bruce told him in response. Why yes, Dr. Midoriya, but Hato-chan's vestige is also developing faster than it should. It's developing at the same rate as Amajiki's vestige. Yagi managed to tell Midoriya, somehow keeping a straight face. Yuchi did not envy Yagi having to deal with them constantly talking about Midoriya being his kid, and had to be the one to actually talk with Midoriya for them. Midoriya blinked, his brow furrowing as he mentally ran through the information, one of his hands coming up to his mouth, and the boy muttering under his breath. See, your brat even speaks in tongues, Yuchi. Clearly your unholy offspring is cursed. Banjo said, pointing at the screen. Yuchi meanwhile scowled back at him. It's Russian, ukulele. Not everyone is as uncultured as you are. Hikage spat back at his successor. Junior's on the move, Nana exclaimed, pointing to the screen. Indeed, looking back to the screen, they saw Yagi was following Midoriya back to the infirmary, and that Midoriya was allowed inside after trading sharp words with Shizenji-san. Yagi, did Junior say what he was doing? Hikage asked. I think so, but I didn't hear him over all of you. Yagi answered, his hands fidgeting and rubbing his worn hands. Demon it. Bruce grumbled, we'll just have to wait for Yuchi's brat to come back and tell us the F going on. Bruce said, crossing his arms and slumping on his throne. Yuchi took the moment to look at the space where the 9th thrones would be. Well, throne would be more accurate to say since the two were just one big one combined. On the left side, a dark indigo shade, a great myriad of features from different animals carved into it, and mixing to create a striking but subtly powerful energy to it, something that matched Amajiki from what they were told and felt from the boy. And pressed right against Amajiki's was Hato's throne. Her throne a pale cream color, shaped by clouds to an elegant visage, tall and regal. And if one didn't look at the armrests where the two thrones were next to each other, then it wouldn't be strong to think that the two were simply pressed together. But the two armrests were in fact intertwined with each other, a cloud remolding into a horned snake with a violet underbelly, violet horns and eyes. Hato's throne also had a matching violet cushion and a few other details on it, though curiously enough there was not any cream accent to Amajiki's part of the throne. You see it too, brat? Second said. Yuchi looked up to see Second leaning against his throne with his arms crossed as he stared at the 9th thrones. Yuchi nodded. It wasn't uncommon for successors and predecessors' thrones to share traits if they were closer. Second's blue throne had speckles of crimson like BLD splatter on it, and Bruce's red throne had a blue seat cushion. Yagi and Nana's thrones an unappealing mix of pink and yellow each. However, there wasn't one that was one-sided like Hato and Amajiki's. It was a bit concerning, actually, since the two were supposed to be very close friends. They had all expected their thrones to bleed over and into the other. Amajiki's colors were bleeding over to Hato's, sure enough. Delicate-looking violet birds and butterflies sat in different places, and the previously mentioned cushion on Hato's side, but there was no trickle of cream back from Hato's side of things. Junior's back, Bruce called, and they all turned to the screen again. I convinced Shizenji-san to let me draw BLD from both of them, and she's running the BLD through some gene marker tests, but I also looked at both of their BLD under a microscope. Midoriya told them. And? Second questioned, Yagi faithfully repeating for him. Hato's white BLD cells are already taking on the traits of Amajiki's white BLD cells. So when the tests come back, I am quite sure they will show she is getting manifest from Amajiki. Midoriya explained. But how? Amajiki couldn't have given her his part of inheritance at any point. Yagi pointed out. I can't say anything for certain. Yuchi's quirk has never been studied in earnest, much less have two holders at the same time before now. But I have a theory. Midoriya stated, a hand going up to his hair. I don't think any of you knows anything about quantum entanglement or quantum physics, do you? Midoriya asked them. The majority of them all shared equally confused looks, so Yagi shook his head. Well, to put it very simply, quantum entanglement is normally the idea of changing something. Say this book, for instance. Midoriya said, then pulled out a notebook and flipped to an empty page and a pen. And that change will be reflected in another exact same book at the same time regardless of distance between the two books. Midoriya elaborated, making a small symbol on the blank page. People theorize we'll be able to use it in the future to communicate in real time with each other once we colonize other parts of the galaxy. And I think there might be some form of quantum entanglement as a factor in inheritance. Midoriya further explained, putting the book away. What do you mean? Yuchi asked. Well, if I'm right, then it explains why Hado is getting Amajiki's quirk. You are still connected to the mind space, correct? Despite no longer having a full connection to the quirks, right? Midoriya questioned back. Yagi nodded, glumly, having lost his ability to use float. So, you won't get either of their quirks, but since they both are connected, they're able to share their quirks through the mind space's collective genetic information, the same way that Nana could share her quirk with you. Midoriya said. Yuchi frowned, thinking it over. I think we can agree that is what's happening. But why isn't Hado's quirk also showing up in Amajiki as well? Or why is Amajiki's quirk the only one being shared? Yuchi questioned, glancing back to the thrones. Midoriya's shoulders slumped, and his eyes went down to the ground. Hado probably isn't letting it be shared. She wouldn't want to risk her quirk, making Amajiki immortal. Midoriya explained sadly. Yuchi's heart fell, realizing exactly what Midoriya meant. You want to let the rest of us in on the quirk bullshit of the hour, brat? Second questioned, having seen that Yuchi had caught on. Yuchi sighed and looked back up to the rest of them. Because of Manifest, if Amajiki got Hado's quirk, his body would handle it without killing him the same way it would eventually kill Hado on its own. He'd just be semi-immortal like Hado was from the beginning. Yuchi answered for them. Doesn't that mean that Hado would be back at square one? And will be immortal again with Amajiki giving her his quirk? Nana said, moving over to the ninth's combined throne, looking concerned. Only if she lets it. She can make a mental block to end the connection, and without Manifest she'll be slowly killed. Yuchi corrected, Yagi blocked us all out completely at times, and Hado can do the same without Amajiki being the one to cut off his quirk. Yuchi further explained. Oh, Yagi said as each of the holders' eyes fell to the ground. Yuchi couldn't blame any of them. The reminder that Hado wanted them to die young was a sharp point to them that they had been tiptoeing around. He knew it was especially strong for Nana and Yagi, maybe Banjo too, but he knew that himself and the rest understood to a degree about not wanting to continue in life after everything that his brother threw at them. Yagi thanked Midoriya for his help. I think we all need to go home and process this. Yuchi suggested to Yagi. Yagi, not wanting to stay in this situation, took the out and left with a quick excuse, then made his way to get back home soon, so they could all talk without anyone would think that Yagi was crazy. I'll take the next shift to watch Hado and Amajiki. I think Nana and Yagi will need time to reprocess things. Yuchi said, standing up from his throne and moving over to the edge of the main area. The water was closer now, and N was floating just about the water using Nana's quirk. And your shift's over, get back to your space? Yuchi called out, floating over to where N was, having to shake N by the shoulder before he came back to himself, and gave a soft grunt back to him. Still dazed, and Yuchi told him, go back to your space, N. N nodded quickly, returning to his place, and Yuchi turned back to the sea below him, to the bright spot of Hado and the dark shadow, like one that was Amajiki. Yuchi supposed it was fitting in a way there were now 3 holders in the world now. His brother had named their quirks after the famous saying from the 3 Musketeers, all for one and one for all. He was also sure that his brother had come up with this grand narrative for himself, one about himself and whatever person would be his next successor, that it was some grand duel of fate or something else. He was sure. Knowing that his quirk had been shared between 2 people would probably PSS him off to no end. Yuchi huffed, bemused at the thought. His brother Aoi had always tried to seem smarter than he actually was. The two had argued before, when they were still incredibly young, about whether there were 3 or 4 musketeers. And now there were 3 of them, for if he still counted Yagi. Strange how life could imitate art sometimes. When given enough time, though, he doubted anyone other than In would appreciate the humor in such an irony. But he'd have to wait until after he recovered from his own turn watching the pair before asking In's thoughts on the matter. Shoyuta realized he was certainly freaking Hisashi out when he wasn't home, passed out on the couch after patrol for the 5th time that week. The fact his phone was now on the ground after it vibrated off the bench, he had put it on the gym's bench for the same reason it fell off of it. How could it not, from with how much Hisashi and Namiri were blowing his phone up? There were even a few missed calls and unread texts from Tensei, Shoyuta was sure. Shoyuta also knew that he was not doing anything to make them feel better by ignoring them and taking his anger out on a punching bag. But he wasn't mentally in a place to reply anything good to them right now. He couldn't exactly tell them that he was dealing with the fact that Oboro is still alive, but trapped by the quirk-stealing boogeyman that had intended to kidnap him instead of Oboro. No, he knew what kind of reaction each of them would have if he just came out and told them. Hisashi would lose his mind, probably have a crying fit. Namiri would join him and then drag him to have a bender with her, because neither of them would be able to handle all of this completely sober. Then once they finished with that, they would be demanding to know everything and tearing up the streets to find Oboro, so they could free him and kick all for ones but to the moon and back. Tensei, on the other hand, would probably be the most reasonable, shocked into silence for a while before securing his baby brother and demanding all of the details from him, which Shoyuta wouldn't be able to do. Tensei was too earnest and limelight to be able to keep everything under wraps. Not bad things for a person to be. And if this wasn't a case he was so personally invested in, he wouldn't mind bringing him in. But Shoyuta couldn't risk making any mistakes this time around. Midoriya had explained everything about Oboro's situation to him once he calmed down. From his best friend becoming what was called a Nomu, and that he now had a body roommate in the form of Kurogiri, to the orders around the 2 of them that they had to follow because of some kind of compulsion quirk. Another reason why Midoriya hadn't read him into the mission earlier. There were protocols should they run into him or the others. A protocol that would bury Oboro deep in unconsciousness until they were out of contact with Kurogiri, and then Kurogiri would be forced to report to All for One how they got in contact, which would expose their only way to kill All for One and probably get Oboro killed for real, since he was too much of a loose end. Even texting wouldn't work since the paranoid old BSTRD had thought of that too. Hence why Shoyuta avoided the rest of his group in order to sort out his own feelings on this matter, so he could come up with a half-decent excuse for them that would be believable. Mainly by punching the stuffing out of the large SWNGNG bag instead of prowling the streets for even the slightest hint of Oboro, but that was a much healthier coping mechanism than anything else he had. A few busted knuckles were better than the alternative of running himself into the ground, though not by much admittedly. He paused from his punching to glance up at the clock and saw it had been at least an hour since he started. He sighed and let his head rest on the bag as he took a minute to breathe. Sweat rolling down his body and the bag's cool surface helping him just a bit, though he should take a break to drink something, even if his arms would be screaming at him for continuing to use them after such a heavy workout. It's not coffee, but it's not surgery either, Sho, the blue-eyed devil he'd been thinking of said, offering one of his grapefruit soda cans. A soft smile on Tensei's face. Shoyuta wasn't the only one in the gym. It was a private gym for professional heroes of all branches, so he wasn't the only one here by a long shot. And frankly, he was too focused on punching the lights out of the bag and ignoring his phone to realize Tensei had entered this part of the gym. Shoyuta huffed, moving to lean on the bag and look and Tensei properly with his arms crossed. "The F are you doing out of Tokyo?" Shoyuta questioned with a raised brow. Tensei huffed back, "Well, between waiting for you to come around with both Hisashi and Namiri blowing up my phone, or taking a couple days off to show Tenya around my old stomping grounds and talking with you," Tensei responded, shrugging his shoulders with a lopsided grin. Shoyuta rolled his eyes and took the soda, cracking it open, and began to drink it, frigid cold. Tensei was right. Between the 2 idiots calling at all hours of the night or taking a couple of days off to try and talk with him, the choice was obvious. "Then where's Junior?" Shoyuta asked once he looked around more carefully and noted that Tenya wasn't here. "He's moved past following me around like a duckling years ago, Sho." I dropped him off at the museum since he wanted to see one of the traveling exhibits. He's got his phone on him if anything happens. Tensei answered with a chuckle. Shoyuta gave an MPFD back. You mind telling me what started the, what is it now, Cold War? Tensei asked softly, clearly not willing to pry if he didn't want to talk about it. Shoyuta sighed. Moving to sit on the bench, he put his phone on. Tensei, sitting on the bench right next to him while Shoyuta rubbed the back of his neck. Work SHD, Shoyuta muttered after a moment of thought before taking another sip of the grapefruit soda. Oof, really? Geez, I don't think I've seen you shut down like this over work since it isn't that bad, is it? Tensei tentatively asked, not wanting to say it, but Shoyuta knew what he was talking about all the same. He had been helping bust a child smuggling ring in his 20s. It was his first job undercover, but they hadn't realized that said child smuggling ring was also a child parastitian ring until he was given a couple hours with one of the boss's favorite kid as a reward. He actually gotten pretty drunk after the case was done and wouldn't talk to them for nearly a month until Tensei and Isamu ganged up on him, which brought to mind the other reason Shoyuta had been pissed after his little debrief. Sasaki was very lucky that Shoyuta did not have the time to head over to the prefecture his office was at, and that Shoyuta did not know where the man lived. Shoyuta would not have been nearly as kind as Midoriya had been, though he absolutely would have foregone sleep to castrate Sasaki if he had laid hands on Togata and make sure his body was never found afterwards with a little help. Nizu owed him for not telling him about Oboro. Even if it was for Oboro's protection, the rat would feel guilty enough to help him cover up murder right now. No, not that bad. Just something that's personally effed me up mentally. Shoyuta assured, tapping his head. Well, Demon, must still be bad if you're actually saying it out loud instead of pretending nothing's happening beyond the normal universe shenanigans. Tensei replied, looking a bit shocked. Shoyuta supposed he couldn't blame him for that. It was an old joke between the group that Shuta's Irish heritage was why he bundled all of his feelings away in the hope that one day it would just blow him up and that he wouldn't have to deal with them. He still cursed himself for letting them talk him into taking that ancestry test. He was only a fourth Irish, and they still snickered when he worn green when they thought he wasn't looking and insisted on dragging him out for a beer on St. Patrick's Day. Shaking his head, Shoyuta focused on keeping Tensei from asking more questions he couldn't answer. Can't say anything. One of Nizu's deep SHD cases, Shoyuta admitted, which was absolutely true, and he signed the appropriate NDAs for being aware of a civilian deep cover case that Midoriya was in. Tensei nodded and patted him on the back, not needing more information since he understood Nizu too. Okay, I got a show. I'll tell Hizashi and Namiri to back off too. Tensei promised. Shuta's shoulders slumped, slightly relieved. He didn't like leaving the house and only came to the gym for the punching bag, and to avoid the two of them questioning him about his sour mood. Will it need a lot of groundwork on your end? I can talk with Hizashi about coming to stay in my apartment over here for a while. Tensei offered, making Shoyuta huff. Not physically demanding for me. There is no need to uproot the cockatoo, Shoyuta said, turning the offer down, though he was thankful that Tensei made the offer at all. In that case, since you don't have school over the break, what do you say to joining me and coming to meet Tenya? Tensei suggested, wanting to get his mind off of whatever was going on in his mysterious mission. Shoyuta raised a brow at him. Didn't I meet him years ago? Pretty sure I still have the scar from it too. Shoyuta pointed out, holding up the pants leg where the faint tiny markings from an old bite. Tensei shoved him playfully with a chuckle. He was barely a year old then. And you haven't seen him since we graduated. Even if I talked about you, Tenya doesn't remember you. Tensei told him, come on, it will just be for a couple of hours. We can go to that cat cafe you like. Tensei said teasingly, waggling his eyebrows at his clear bribe. Shoyuta rolled his eyes. Fine, but you're paying, legacy case. Shoyuta agreed, standing up and heading for the showers. Tensei must have called the rest of the group while he was cleaning himself up, cause Namiri and Hizashi had stopped messaging him by the time he came out, and he joined Tensei in the sports car he was driving around in. Shoyuta couldn't absolutely swear to it, but he was 50% sure it was the same one Tensei borrowed during their second year and took all of them joy riding in. He wouldn't put it past him since he doubted Tensei's parents would notice if Tensei took his grandmother's car for a week. Tensei was the golden child, after all, even if they weren't around as much because they were wrapped up in their careers. Not that he'd ever say that to Tensei's face these days, his friend had to basically raise his baby brother himself while juggling school and hero work with weirdly supportive parents that were never there for anything but appearances. At least Tensei had his grandmother back then. Though as Tensei took a sharp turn, Shoyuta had to wish that Tensei hadn't taken after her when it came to his driving. The whole family were a bunch of F-speed demons. How they weren't stopped for speeding, he didn't know or care, just glad they made it to the museum in one piece, and as soon as possible. "You okay there, Sho?" Tensei teasingly asked, already out of the car and leaning on the passage side of the car. F-speed demons. Shoyuta hissed, smacking Tensei's face away from him, which Tensei had the gall to laugh off as he dragged Shoyuta out of the car. Once inside, it wasn't that strong to find Tenya. The boy was almost the spitting image of Tensei. Well, if Tensei had red eyes, glasses, and a stick up his butt. "Sir, how could you come to such a respectful institution without making sure you were properly dressed?" Tenya exclaimed, going right over to him, and had one of his arms chopping the air for some reason. Shoyuta merely gave the boy the stink-eyed back. Sure, he was in a heavily stained tank top, sweatpants, and combat boots that all clashed with each other, but the brat didn't have to be so loud about it. "Do you make it a habit of telling strangers they look like SHD?" Shoyuta questioned back, making the boy sputter. "To that I was not, I merely mean to." Tenya stumbled trying to string a sentence together, but stopped when Tensei, the laughing BSTRD, put his hands on Tenya's shoulders. "Don't worry, Ten. Sho is just pulling your chain," Tensei assured the boy through his chuckling, then looked Shoyuta dead in the eye. "He knows he looks like CRP." Tensei added, and Tenya sputtered again. "Nisan, how could you say that about friend?" Tenya questioned, looking utterly lost after catching on that Shoyuta and Tensei knew each other. "It's not an insult if it's true, kid. I have to look this way for my work, kid." Shoyuta cut the boy off before he went on to some kind of rant. "I often work undercover, and looking like a narc would be a fast way to get but killed in duty. No one making a back alley deal looks twice at the drunk bum passed out on the ground." Shoyuta further explained, shrugging his shoulders. "All right, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to offend you or your important work, sir." Tenya apologized, bowing nearly at a uniform angle. Shoyuta sked. "It takes a lot more than that to get under my skin, brat. My problem is that you thought telling me you thought I looked bad outweighed your common sense to think about why I might look like SHD." Shoyuta corrected, and the boy stared up at him baffled, and a bit pink for being called a brat. "Not everyone is rich like you, brat. And there's a lot of reasons someone wouldn't look their best, and unless you have a second quirk along with those engines in your legs, then you can't know what CRP someone else is going through." Shoyuta pointedly told the boy, "I could have just dragged myself out of bed for the first time after a massive depressive episode, and wanted to cheer myself up by coming here, only to have some random kid accost me for the way I look. Can you really not see why that's wrong?" Shoyuta questioned with his arms crossed. Looking properly shamed, the boy nodded with his tail all but tucked between his legs. "The only reason I'm asking you these questions is because Tensei told me you plan to become a hero yourself, and heroes need to know better than to judge someone out loud like that." Shoyuta informed the boy. "Okay, Sho, that's enough teaching off the clock," Tensei told him, wrapping an arm around Tenya's shoulders. "Now, let's all go to the cat cafe like I promised, Sho," Tensei said, deflecting to leaving. "You better get me coffee matcha's legacy case," Shoyuta told Tensei, not even bothering to look behind himself, and just started walking onto Tensei's borrowed car, knowing the two were following him. As long as he got some cats, he'd deal with Tensei's kid brother and the stick up his butt. Mirio blinked. He probably should get up. He had been lying in bed since he ate breakfast. Mirio knew his dad was concerned, and that he was trying not to pry despite his clear worry. He would need a shower today. It wouldn't make his dad's concerns go away, but showering would at least make him worry just a bit less. But Mirio couldn't really bring himself to get up at the moment. He would need to do it later then, sometime before the sunset. With that in mind, he looked up to the clock on Sunny's side of the room. It would still be 3 hours before Sunny would come back home. Still training for his stomach twisting made him bury his face in his pillow. Mirio knew he was probably overreacting, but he couldn't help feeling awful, tears building in the corners of his eyes. How could he not? After a whole year of work he thought was to help build him up to be the hero he wanted to be of hours. Upon hours of work to reach a point, he was finally getting rid of the envy that plagued him, only for the truth to come out. Of course, Sir wouldn't think he'd be a good hero on his own. Just some vessel that looked like the hero he was obsessed with. Mirio wanted to be angry. Angry like Masao, Nijire, Heya, Oz, and Sunny, to have the same hate that boiled their BLD coursing through his veins. But he couldn't. No, the only thing he could do was bury his head in the sand and ignore everything around him. Because if he didn't, then he'd have to acknowledge the feeling that came when he learned that Sir was grooming him. Used. Mirio's skin crawled even thinking about it, but it was true regardless. As painful as it was to admit. He moved from covering his face with the pillow to crushing it to his chest in a hug, his fingers digging into the pillow instead of his palms. Biting his lip as he recalled his interactions with Sir before now. Of each fond look on Sir's face when he showed the man his progress and the man's special plan for him. Looks that once filled him with such pride and warmth. Looks that now left him wanting to throw up. But even as bad as that sounded, Mirio knew that people would not begrudge him for feeling that way. They probably expected it even. They wouldn't be so understanding of his desperation, though. Desperation for his appearance to not be the only reason as to why Sir chose him. It sounded bad in his own mind, but he still wanted it. Wanted for there to be a reason that he was picked out of all the people the Sir could have chosen, like Sir actually thought he was competent or something. That he held some kind of meaning to the man other than being his vessel for Yagi's quirk in it. Mirio thought that Sir was his mentor for F's sake. That Sir really believed in him and his goals and wanted so badly for him to succeed that he had gone out of his way to help him every step of his journey. But no, Mirio was just a piece in a plan, and he was only being trained to become the next All Might or something, likely to replace the real All Might in Sir's life after the man had cut ties with him. And wasn't that just the kicker? The part that left him all but gutted in his bed. That Sir probably never saw Mirio as himself. Just a replacement for the man that Sir obsessed over. Like he wasn't worth the man's attention by himself. That even when he was being groomed, he still wasn't enough on his own, and it still had to be about someone else. God, he sounded whinny and jealous when he put it like that. But Mirio couldn't think of any other way to say it, which is why he never said anything to anyone about how he felt about Sir grooming him. Because just how messed up could his head get? First, he couldn't stop feeling jealous of his friends for their strong work. Now here he was wallowing in a pity party over the fact his mentor grooming him hadn't even been because Sir was that obsessed with him. It was so messed up. How could he even think about talking about it with anyone? So Mirio did the only sensible thing he could do and stayed curled up in bed, waiting for his emotions to sort themselves out. If it was also more comfortable than talking it out with Inu-san, then it was just a small bonus. A sudden knock on his door made him jump, though. Sunny couldn't be back this early, and his dad had checked on him half an hour ago, so it couldn't be him. Why, yes, he said, voice croaking somewhat. It's Midoriya Togata-san. Do you mind if I come in? Deku-Sensei, of all people, asked back. Mirio's brain stalled for a moment. What was he doing here? Had something happened to Sunny and Nijire? With that awful thought, Mirio forced himself to his feet and over to his door, pulling it open. Is Sunny okay? Mirio asked with wide eyes. Deku-Sensei blinked a bit stunned, then held his hands up placatingly. Amajiki-san is all right. I just came to speak with you, Togata-san. Deku-Sensei assured him. Oh, lamely fell from Mirio's mouth. He'd been expecting one of his friends to stop beating around the bush at some point. Maybe a teacher. Though this was sooner than he thought they would talk with him. Sunny and Nijire had only taken inheritance the day before. And not having the energy to fight about it, though, Mirio just moved away from the doorway and sat back on his bed. Deku-Sensei followed him in, and then asked him, would you like to come to my farm to see and pet the sheep? Mirio's brain stalled again, and a small was the only thing he managed to say in his confusion. Sheep. Farm. I can imagine that despite everyone's best intentions, you've been feeling a bit suffocated by everyone's attention on you. Deku-Sensei explained gently with a soft but understanding smile. Mirio ducked his head ashamed and hugging his pillow close to him, because although he would never say it, Deku-Sensei was right about all of the concern being suffocating. It certainly helped him understand why Sunny would hide away even when he tried to do the same for him. So, I thought you might like a few hours away from, well, everything. Deku-Sensei offered once again. Mirio rubbed his neck, and he looked away from Deku-Sensei. It sounded like fun, and the idea of just playing with some sheep did sound better than laying around his room again. His dad would also like it if he got some more sun. I don't know. I'm not exactly dressed to go anywhere, Mirio replied, looking at the pajamas he had been wearing for the last couple of days. Deku-Sensei waved his hand dismissively. Don't worry about how you look. Most of my workers there have been to rock bottom more than once in their lives. And even then, it's the warmest part of the year, so you just need a coat. Deku-Sensei told him with a reassuring smile. Mirio considered that new information, weighing it carefully before ultimately nodding his head. I guess I could go. Just for an hour, though. Mirio begrudgingly agreed. If word got back, he went out of the house with Deku-Sensei for a little while. Then his friends might worry less about him. Okay, I told your dad we might be going out, so I just need to contact our ride. Deku-Sensei commented, pulling out his phone and texting someone. And to his surprise, swirling black and purple mist suddenly appeared in the middle of his room and grew to be bigger than himself. Mirio's mouth dropped, and he felt a bit dumb as he pointed at the mist cloud that suddenly appeared. Deku-Sensei chuckled. I told your dad about this too, and he gave permission for us to use a teleportation quirk to get to and from. Just make sure to hold your breath before you go through. Deku-Sensei informed him, then motioned to the portal, waiting for him to go first. Mirio hesitated before he moved to grab some slippers to wear at least something, and then cautiously approached the mist portal. Taking a deep breath, then with his eyes closed walked forward as fast as he could, hoping for it to not feel that weird, or if it did the feeling would pass quickly. The soft brush of mist hit him, then he was suddenly dragging into it. Then for a moment Mirio thought his quirk had been activated by the mist before the smell of ozone hit him strong. Before his body lurched forward, and he quickly found his footing from his years of experience. Then he covered his eyes with his hand, because this new colder place was way brighter than his room had been. Then when his eyes adjusted, he saw he was standing by a field with a fence in front of him with large fluffy sheep on the other side of the fence. Mirio stared at the peaceful scene until a small cough came from behind, and Mirio jumped, turning quickly to see who it was. And perhaps he should have expected it, but it was just Deku-Sensei behind him. Do you want to go in? The sheep are incredibly tame and will just walk around us if we decide to lay down in the pasture. Deku-Sensei asked him softly. Sure, why not? Mirio replied, following Deku-Sensei in and settled down under a tree, a few sheep coming over to them, and even getting to play with a lamb for a bit. All of which was a much-needed distraction from the little depressive slump he had been in. After all, how could he think about Sir when there was the cutest little lamb being at him? I dreamed of being a hero, you know, Deku-Sensei suddenly said, bring Mirio out of his pleasant days of sheep to stare at him. You did? Mirio questioned surprised, half because of the statement itself, and half because it had been the first time he had spoken since they entered the paddock half an hour ago. Yeah, up until about 3 years ago, the thing I wanted most in life was to become a hero, Deku-Sensei confirmed with a nod, then a huff of amusement which made the sheep resting its head on his lap stir a bit, but ultimately stayed put. I probably watched All Might's debut video 1,000,000 times, hoping that one day I could be just like him. Deku-Sensei confessed wistfully as started petting the sheep on him. Really? But you would be such a good hero, just as you are. Mirio pointed out, causing Deku-Sensei to chuckle under his breath, shaking his head. I wasn't anything like I am now all those years ago, Tagada-san. Just another kid starting middle school and as quirkless as the day I was born, Deku-Sensei told him, a bittersweet smile on his face. Okay, but look at you now. You would have definitely become a great hero in your own right. Why would you need a quirk with how cool you are all on your own? Mirio argued, pointing both of his hands at Deku-Sensei, palms up. Deku-Sensei's lip trembled, and there was something sad in his gaze now. You know, I don't think I'll ever get used to people telling me that. The people only started telling me that after I gave up my dream of being a hero. Deku-Sensei muttered, likely not intending for Mirio to hear him. You gave up your dream. Why? Mirio questioned, flabbergasted. Despite knowing that Deku-Sensei was 2 years younger than him, he couldn't see the boy ever giving up on anything in his life without a fight, And even if he lost that fight, there was no way he'd just let it go without some amount of a spiteful reaction. Because no matter what I did, I could never be enough, Deku-Sensei answered, looking away into the distance. Mirio, on the other hand, felt his jaw drop. Not enough, he repeated in his disbelief. How could someone like Deku-Sensei not be enough? Deku-Sensei chuckled, though this didn't sound amused, but forced. It didn't matter how strong I worked, the hours of research I did, or how strong I would have trained myself if given the chance. I was quirkless. And that was all anyone would ever see. Deku-Sensei morosely explained, a smile forcibly kept on his face. Mirio's heart fell hearing that. And he remembered the articles and stories constantly run about Deku-Sensei, and even the protest the first years gave on Deku-Sensei's behalf. Surely someone must have thought you could do it though, right? Mirio asked, pulling his legs to his CHSD and hugging them. The smile fell from Deku-Sensei's face. My childhood friend I promised to be hero partners with when we grew up refused to even speak to me and started to bully me. Everyone else kept telling me to be realistic, and my mom. When I asked her if I could still be a hero if I didn't have a quirk, she just apologized to me. Deku-Sensei told him, his eyes losing a lot of the life in them as he stared at the ground. Mirio felt choked by the other's admission. He couldn't even comprehend how he'd feel if he had been in Deku-Sensei's place, constantly looking and begging for someone to believe in him, or to let him have even a scrap of hope, and having it crushed at every turn. His dad had been worried, but even still his dad supported him. Mirio couldn't imagine how bad it would have felt if his dad had just apologized to him instead of helping him. I did my best to hide it, but it hurt so much knowing that no matter what I did, that I would never be enough, not to be a hero, or even a living, breathing, and thinking person to some people. Deku-Sensei continued to tell him, one of his hands coming up to rest over his heart. Even now, despite everything I'm doing now, even though I know beyond the shadow of a doubt that there are hundreds of people that rely on me to get by, I struggle with feeling like I'll ever be enough. Deku-Sensei confessed somberly as his fingers clenched the fabric of his shirt and vest. But Miyake always talks about how much you do, about the people you save, and all the work you do for the community every day. You've helped so many of us live so much better and understand our quirks. You've helped me. Mirio protested, his arms failing slightly as if trying to help with his point, but he couldn't think of what to do with them. Deku-Sensei scoffed and looked up to him with half-lidded eyes. And all that I can do now won't ever erase the years and years of helplessness I felt. Being able to help people now can't make me forget every time someone made me feel like I was so much worse than nothing. Deku-Sensei told him, slightly bitter. What could be worse than nothing? Mirio questioned, unsure why that of all things was what he asked. A liability? Deku-Sensei replied flatly. Mirio practically and physically recoiled hearing his answer, remembering how often that had been told to him when he told people he wanted to be a hero, from his classmates, both by those well-meaning and maliciously by others. Even his counselor had tried to strongly dissuade him from heroics, because someone with a quirk like his wouldn't be much help, and that he would only be a distraction to the other heroes on scene at best. And you know that wasn't even the worst part of what they did to me back then, Deku-Sensei said, looking away from him and over the horizon to something that wasn't there. Mirio's mouth opened to ask, but words wouldn't come to him. Deku-Sensei, though, continued without Mirio to prompt him. It was how desperate they made me feel to please them, Deku-Sensei told him, and the words hit Mirio straight in the CHSD. It didn't matter how badly they treated me. I thought that maybe if I did just a little more then I'd be enough. Maybe if I was quieter, they'd like me better. Maybe if I stopped doing this or that. If I did all of the classroom chores and helped them with their homework, they'd stop being mean to me. Deku-Sensei detailed for him. Mirio's stomach twisted as he listened on in silent horror thinking about it, remembering how he had done the same things himself before Ueno and his friends were expelled, and feeling even more awful for Deku-Sensei. But it would never be enough. Nothing I could have done was ever going to be enough for them. Deku-Sensei said just above a whisper. And when I think back to that time, the scariest thought that comes to mind is that I don't know just how much I would have let them do to me. I probably would have let them do anything they wanted to me just to be human again to them. Deku-Sensei confessed, A soberness came to Mirio with that thought. Just how much would he have let Sir get away with? Sir had his number. Given him a strict training schedule, he'd barely question and all, but commanded his diet. And if Sir told him to come over to his agency for more training, he had gone over. And for the most part, he never questioned any of that, just let Sir do it because he wanted to make Sir proud of him. God, just what else would he have let Sir do? Togata, do you know why I'm telling you these things? Deku-Sensei asked, bringing Mirio back out of his thoughts. Mirio tried to think of a reason, but his brain was a bit clogged up from his emotions running all over the place. So that I know I'm not alone, Mirio weakly offered after a minute. I suppose that is a part of the reason, yes, but more importantly, I want you to know I have been in the same place you were too, and that I understand how conflicted you feel right now, Deku-Sensei told him, placing a firm hand on Mirio's shoulder. Mirio's eyes met Deku-Sensei's, and that despite knowing more than anything that you should hate him, you wish that Sir actually wanted you for who you were. Deku-Sensei said, a bone-deep understanding in his eyes. Mirio buried his face in his knees, ashamed of having it said out loud. Sir was someone important to you, someone you thought you could trust, and he took advantage of that. Deku-Sensei told him, squeezing Mirio's shoulder harder. And when someone like that hurts you, it will always leave your emotions all jumbled up in ways that makes you feel awful in ways that don't make sense to everyone. Deku-Sensei explained. So, when you want to talk about it, I want you to know that I will never judge you because I have been in the same place emotionally and will tell you something that is very important for you to know. Deku-Sensei promised. Mirio raised his head to look at Deku-Sensei. You are more than enough to achieve your goal, and you have already saved some people and have 999,995 more people to save left. Deku-Sensei told him, taking Mirio off guard. What? Mirio questioned, staring at him. During your internships, you saved 4 people after you were allowed into the field properly, but even long before that, you saved someone just by being exactly who you've always been. Deku-Sensei explained, a smile coming back to his face. Who did I? Mirio tried to ask, his mind racing to figure out who Deku-Sensei could be talking about and struggling to figure who it could be. You saved Amajiki. Deku-Sensei answered simply. What? But I didn't. Mirio tried to protest, but Deku-Sensei chuckled. There are different ways you can save someone, Mirio, and you saved Amajiki in a way most people couldn't or wouldn't think he would need saving from. Deku-Sensei told him. Mirio stared at him, waiting for him to explain further. You saved him from being forced to live a life that would have been utterly miserable and inspired him to reach for the things he's always wanted in life. Deku-Sensei said with a fond smile. Mirio felt even more lost as he stared at Deku-Sensei. Tell me this. Do you think that Amajiki would have ever had the courage to pursue his dream of being a hero on his own? That he would have even known he wanted to save people if it wasn't for you standing by his side the whole way? Deku-Sensei asked him. Of course he would, Mirio replied instantly. Deku-Sensei hummed. Maybe he would have wanted to be a hero, but Amajiki would have never had the strength to choose a different path than the one he felt obligated to do for his family without you there by his side. Deku-Sensei told him. But I was just his friend, Mirio protested. Deku-Sensei chuckled, a fond look on his face. People often underestimate just how much of a role they play in the lives of the people they're closest to. Deku-Sensei said, shaking his head. You stood by his side ever since you met, supporting Amajiki no matter what and defending him and his desires regardless of what happened, drove him to be the best version of himself, and comforted him when he needed it. Deku-Sensei detailed for him, and Mirio couldn't help feeling bashful. You were Amajiki's first hero, and now, because of you, he is on his way to live his best life and surrounded by people who love him. And he became stronger than he ever thought he would be as a star student of the best hero school in the world. Deku-Sensei further elaborated. Mirio buried his face in his knees, flustered this time around instead of ashamed. Deku-Sensei was giving him way too much credit for Sunny's strong work. Sunny was always going to be someone amazing. He had just given Sunny a little push here or there. You aren't All Might, but you never had to be. Because even since you were little, you were the kind of hero that saved people in the most important way possible, the kind of hero that Amajiki and I needed most in life. Deku-Sensei said, letting his head fall to one side. "What kind of hero is that?" Mirio tepidly asked. "The kind that empowers and inspires people to be the best version of themselves. A hero that cares for everyone's dreams and helps them achieve them to the best of your abilities. And you're going to change the world with your kindness," Deku-Sensei answered. And that was the final blow to his heart, as Mirio began to cry and leaned against Deku-Sensei. Deku-Sensei didn't say anything and just wrapped an arm around his shoulders and let him get it all out. Yuyu grumbled as she put on her RBB gloves before grabbing her bag and leaving her room. "I'm heading out. I'll be with my friends until supper," Yuyu called over her shoulder as she walked downstairs. Again, her older brother, Coco, questioned while her younger sister giggled. "She's going to see Nijire-chan," Mimi teased. Yuyu rolled her eyes, even if her face was a touch pink, but didn't say anything, making her other older brother guffaw. "She is?" Toto exclaimed in disbelief. "Shut up," Yuyu told him, pushing him, both for being stupid and because he was blocking the door. Yuyu sighed once she was out of the house and rubbed her forehead. Gosh, her siblings could be so embarrassing sometimes. Just because she came out as Demi instead of Bi like she previously thought, they started teasing her about everyone she spent time with. Okay, maybe she had an itty-bitty crush on Nijire last year and still thought Nijire was the most adorable woman she had ever seen in her life. But that didn't mean it was anything more than that. She had crushes on everyone in her friend group at one point or another. They were all attractive and sweet people. And of course her stupid hormones had to make her a happy horny idiot at times. Thankfully, none of those crushes were anything serious, and she was over all of them before any of the inheritance stuff started to go down, or she might have taken this much worse than she already was. Which, as she collapsed on a seat on the train, she still felt pretty overwhelmed over, and she wasn't even one of the two that had to take the stupid quirk in the first place. Yuyu's shoulders slumped as her gaze fell to the ground, and she stared at her shoes. A lot of things she thought about herself had changed. She had been pretty confident when she first went into the entrance exam. Her quirk static shot was pretty powerful, and she'd trained her aim to be super accurate. Static shot was still a cool quirk, but she couldn't help feeling like it fell short after everything that happened in the last year. Her quirk wouldn't have been much help if she could use it back during the attack at the mall, or for anything that wasn't combat-related if she was being honest. Sure, she wanted to be a more combat-focused hero, but she didn't just want to deal with combat. Making arrows of electricity also didn't sound like it would be worth much in the face of something like that Aoi guy who could steal quirks. Yuyu brought her thumb to her mouth and tasted the RBB as she nibbled on it, as she nervously thought of the whole inheritance situation. Having two of her closest friends risking their lives first by taking an ancient collection of quirks that might not fully agree with them and would have killed almost anyone else. And then they might have to risk their lives again if the plan to kill Aoi didn't work. And the worst part of it all, she wasn't sure what the hell she could do about this whole situation other than moral support. A thought that put a pit in her stomach. Once she heard her station coming up, she quickly stood up and shook her head of her thoughts. She wasn't just her quirk. Both Deku-Sensei, Bullet-Sensei, and Aizawa-Sensei told that to her that over and over again. She would only be her quirk if she let herself be just that and didn't expand herself beyond that. Miyake's lizard quirk didn't stop him from learning medicine or limit him to being a hero focused on combat, and she wouldn't let herself just be a combat-focused hero either. But Miyake had the medicine side covered, and she admittedly was way too squeamish to do anything besides basic triage. So, the last couple days she had been working strong to figure out how to take her own skills and make herself more useful in the fight. And last night she came to an idea that she felt comfortable and even a little excited to try and do. Yuyu passed the gates and quickly went looking for either Deku-Sensei or Nizu-san. Needing to talk with them about this change, she was hoping to do since it would involve changing her class schedule, and she wanted their opinions as well. Deku-Sensei was the first one she found, and she rushed over to him. "Deku-Sensei, there's something I need to ask you," she said, and Deku-Sensei lifted his head up from his laptop and blinked, glancing down, then looked confused. "Hey, San, you're early," Deku-Sensei commented. Yuyu nodded. "I thought this might take an hour or so to talk about, so I caught an earlier train," she explained, shifting her weight from foot to foot. "Okay, what did you need to talk with me about?" Deku-Sensei asked, closing the laptop and setting it aside to fully listen to her. Yuyu swallowed. If I could test out of a couple of my classes, would I be able to take a couple of the support course classes instead? Yuyu inquired, her hands tightening on the straps of her backpack. Deku-Sensei's eyes widened, surprised by her question. Good. She was hoping that was the reaction she would get. Heroes with electricity quirks rarely had much gear that wasn't to be used to insulate themselves or direct their quirks. So, who would expect a combat hero like her to have, or be able to pilot drones, or hack through a door as effectively as she could break it down? I think you could do that. Normally, though, the option doesn't come up until the start of third year when the students have chosen which of the branches. They've picked which classes were you going to test out of. Deku-Sensei answered thoughtfully, his head tilted. Relief flooded Yuyu's CHSD. She had a backup plan of joining the school programming club if she wouldn't be allowed to take classes outside of her own course. English and math. They're my best subjects, and I'll only need to study a little more on my math to finish it off. Yuyu told him, taking off her backpack to show him the books she managed to grab from Coco. She never thought she would ever be this thankful for her older brother aiming to be an English teacher. She also was glad that Coco had been willing to let her borrow his college textbooks. Deku-Sensei hummed thoughtfully as he looked over the books. You'll probably be able to test out of math pretty easily with a little more work. It would take some more work to get you out of English, he warned her. I know, I plan to cram study these books until next term in order to test out. Yuyu replied, determined to get this done and out of the way so that she could get as caught up on programming and engineering as soon as she could. Deku-Sensei smiled up at her, and she couldn't help feeling warmed over by the pride in his eyes. Okay, come on, I'll help you study. You'll learn faster with someone fluent in English to speak with. There will be an ORL part to testing out, so you'll need to be able to speak it as well. Deku-Sensei told her and motioned for her to follow him. Oh, she hadn't expected that, but far be it from her to turn Deku-Sensei, personally tutoring her down. Ah, and do you want to do physical work of the support course, programming, or both? Deku-Sensei asked as they walked. Both. Yuyu answered confidently. She wanted to build and program her drones herself, and to be able to take any nasty surprises apart, like if she got caught up in a bomb situation. It felt like something that would only happen in comics, but so were ancient evil superpowers. And clearly those existed in real life. Then you might also want to get into contact with Iguchi-san to get a head start on your work in those classes, so you won't have to start completely from scratch. Deku-Sensei suggested to her. Yuyu's eyes widened. She had forgotten that Miyake's older brother was in tech, but Deku-Sensei was right that she could go to him for help in learning more about this area. Right. I'll ask Miyake for his number later. Yuyu commented, nodding her head. Yuyu groaned as she walked out of the main school building. If Deku-Sensei ran her through the rest of the books like he had today, she was sure that she could probably test out of English before the end of the month. Well, at least she wouldn't have to worry about fitting time to study and meet up with Miyake's older brother. Speaking of which, Yuyu took a deep breath and slapped her cheeks, hoping for it to give her a second wind of some sort. Yuyu walked out to the training fields to find Miyake and get his brother's number. She wanted to talk with him about if he would have the time to teach her things, and if they did, then she wanted to talk with him about where to meet up. Finding the orange lizard boy rather quickly, since he was a pretty big guy that was strong to miss. Miyake, she called, waving a hand to further get his attention. Miyake tilted his head and thrilled back. Yes, he asked back. Do you think you could ask your brother something for me? Yuyu inquired, glad she had the stamina to run all the way over here without having to double over like she would have in first year. Miyake tilted his head again, and Yuyu wondered if he got that from Deku-Sensei after seeing him do it just like Deku-Sensei did up close too. I wanted to know if he would be willing to teach me some stuff about technology and programming. So could you ask him for me? I don't want him to feel pressured by asking him directly. Yuyu explained, fiddling with her fingers, slightly nervous. I shall ask him if he wants to. I shall forward you his number. Miyake informed her with a nod of his head. Thank you, Dash. Yuyu's words were cut off by a shout from Nijire. Mirio-chan, she squealed, leaping over them and almost barreling over Mirio in a hug. Yuyu couldn't blame her for her excitement. This was the first time any of them had seen Mirio outside of his house, and she was excited to see him too. She heard Mirio chuckling as she got closer to the two of them, and Mirio hugged Nijire back. Sorry for worrying you guys, Mirio told her over Nijire's shoulder. Yuyu huffed, don't apologize. You learned some pretty heavy stuff, and needed time to deal with it on your own. Whatever we were feeling takes a back seat to that, okay? Yuyu told him, putting a hand on his shoulder. Mirio averted his eyes. I know, but you guys got pretty worried while I was in my funk. Mirio said a bit abashed as he rubbed the back of his neck. No apologizes, only stabbing, sir. Nijire protested, her words muffled slightly with her face still buried in Mirio's shoulder, making Mirio sigh when Miyake nodded his head in agreement despite only hearing half the conversation. Guys, we can't stab a pro hero. Mirio tried to tell them. Technically we can, and Deku-Sensei will lend us his knives to do it. Miyake corrected. Yuyu blinked, looking up at him. I thought you said Deku-Sensei doesn't support violence. Yuyu asked, confused. Miyake thrilled. Deku-Sensei frowns upon violence specifically in his name. He understands there are times when violence is necessary, and he has an open stabbing policy with known pedophiles, rapists, and groomers. Miyake replied nonchalantly with a shrug. Wait, really? Mirio said, surprised. He hands out pocket knives to the kids in the districts with the rest of the supplies and has plans to give us combat knives if we pass the exam and get our provisional licenses. Miyake told them, causing Nijire to have stars in her eyes. Yes. Nijire cheered, looking giddy at the thought. He'll teach us how to knife someone really good too, right? Who do you think he'll get you a custom one made from your hair? So you won't lose it if you use your quirk, Mirio-chan? Nijire questioned, practically bouncing from her happiness. Most likely, yes. Miyake confirmed. Yuyu sighed, letting her head fall into her hands as Nijire cheered even louder. Unsure if she should be worried about Nijire being taken in by the cops for stabbing Sir, or thinking of ways to include a knife into her costume. At least Mirio was in higher spirits. Tamaki's eyes opened, and he wasn't surprised when he found himself in the anemone Nana had placed them in when they first got inheritance. Even less surprised when he saw Nijire resting beside him. She was still awake then, but would probably join him soon. They timed their sleep schedules to happen around the same time, since Deku-Sensei and Yagi said they might have continuing dreams of the mind space of the inheritance. They were right. So, he and Nijire started exploring their space in the mind space as their bodies adjusted to the new genes. With visits from Nana occasionally, letting them ride around on her head crest like the first time. He had to admit he didn't think it would be an ocean or this reef they were in. From what Deku-Sensei and Yagi-san said, it was usually a place you felt attached to that their spaces were molded after. But as he looked out over the colorful reef that had slowly filled up with sea life, Tamaki couldn't say he hated this place either. It was peaceful, almost being so far under the waves and away from most people. Nijire shifted next to him and blinked awake. Tamaki raised his hands to ask her how she was with sign language, but froze when he saw there was a change in Nijire's appearance. There were now seahorse fins replacing her ears. Something he hadn't noticed before. Her hair had covered them when she was laying down before, and, judging by the way Nijire's eyes went wide, his ears must have changed too. Tamaki brought his hands up to his ears, and indeed felt fins instead of ears. Why would their appearance change? Well, he could understand as changing, but he hadn't eaten any seahorse, and that wouldn't explain how Nijire changed too. Nijire reached up and touched her own ears, her shock probably mirroring his own when she felt the fins there. A weird dolphin's trilling noise came out of her mouth, and she squeaked, covering her mouth. Tamaki's eyes went wide. He opened his mouth and tried to say something, and unlike before when it would have not made any noise whatsoever, a dolphin's chirping came out. Nijire couldn't help laughing. Well, it was the dolphin's version of a laugh, but Tamaki felt some of his nerves melting away since she felt comfortable to laugh this off. Do you think this is because inheritance is settling even more into us, that we're reflecting more of our space, or adapting to it? Nijire asked in sign, making sure to use air quotes before and after signing adapting. Tamaki considered that it would make the most sense, he guessed, like a subconscious show of what was happening to their bodies. Using his own quirk as a way of showing what was happening to them. Tamaki shrugged back, unsure since he had no clue, and wasn't even sure if Deku-Sensei would know since there wasn't a lot of study in mental quirks like this. Well, let's see if we can go deeper now. Nijire signed to him before she began to swim over to the edge of the reef. Tamaki was quick to follow her. finding the resistance was less as he moved through the water compared to the other nights. They had tried to swim deeper before, but once they got just past the reef, the water pressure felt like they had gone 100 feet deeper instead of just a few feet to the left. Now, though he didn't feel that same kind of resistance, the two of them went a few feet beyond the reef before stopping and looking around. The reef was pretty big and stretched out both left and right, and looking down there was the cliff wall the reef sat on, with very few bits and pieces of the reef reaching down a couple of feet, but not by much. Tamaki and Nijire shared a look, then down before their eyes met again. Nijire raised a brow in silent question. "Do you want to go deeper?" Tamaki nodded, grabbing Nijire's hand before they swam deeper together. The light dimming, and Tamaki was glad they were holding hands since the clarity of the water hadn't changed, and if it wasn't for the shrinking of the reef overhead, he wouldn't think they were moving at all. Tamaki was just about to suggest turning back around after what felt like 20 minutes when something large came up to greet them, a large purple ray with tentacles trailing underneath it. "Hello, kids. It seems you can come deeper now." They heard a male voice come. Nijire answered back with a dolphin's nodding her head, making the man chuckle. "I'm in, the sixth holder. Do you want to ride to see how far you can go?" And offered. Nijire nodded her head and tugged him along to sit upon the back of the ray. Though if he didn't have armor like plates on his back, then he didn't know how they would have held on to In. "Ready?" In asked. The two of them chirped in confirmation, and then descended deeper in the water, much faster than they had before on their own. They eventually spotted a large kelp forest, and In glided between the large strands of kelp around them. Feeling the pressure building, Tamaki chirped and released In, Nijire, and In going another few meters before stopping. Nijire swimming back over to him and asking what was wrong in sign. "Pressure is building. Can't go further yet. Need to wait here and adjust." Tamaki answered her. Nijire looked disappointed but nodded understandingly. "Well, at least you have learned to recognize when you can't go further. That's a good sign." In commented, his tentacles wrapping around them. "Let's get you both settled for the night. Probably won't be much more time before you both wake up." And told them, moving through the kelp forest. Eventually finding a nice clump of kelp, and the two of them settled there. The slimy texture of the plants wasn't ideal, but it was still better than risking floating off into the sea around them. They only made that mistake once, and they had to scramble that night to find each other again, since their space was large enough to lose each other. "See you both again tomorrow, kids," and said as Tamaki's eyes began to feel heavy. Opening his eyes, Tamaki again. He saw the ceiling of the bedroom he shared with Mirio, and he would have been content to stare at it for a little longer if it wasn't for the vibrating of his phone. Rolling over, he grabbed for it and winced at the brightness before he read the excited and lengthy messages that Nijire had sent him with a smile. The two of them had become much closer since they chose to accept inheritance together. Strong not to when they spent every night together now and been training with each other every day. But Tamaki was sure it was the time spent in the mind space together that had been what had really brought them closer. He had noticed that a lot of the spontaneous energy Nijire always had wasn't present in the mind space, and he had managed to get up the nerve to ask about it when the two of them were watching the new reef fish like they were stargazing the second night they had it. Nijire had fallen silent, and he wanted to apologize, but then Nijire answered him. Her quirk made energy constantly, and she had to be constantly moving or talking or something to keep from too much energy building up under her skin. Something he and the others suspected beforehand, but Nijire explained that it didn't follow her into the mind space. She wasn't sure for the exact reason. Perhaps making the mind space was draining enough, but she never felt the desperate thrum of unspent energy in their space. And for the first time, she could just be. The fact she could stand still and just watch the world go by her was utterly magical, and something she couldn't even do when she was very young, having been born with her quirk and constantly needed to be just a little active. There were a lot of talks like that between them like that, and with each one, Tamaki's discomfort with being around her dwindled to the point he started using her first name out loud, her argument that if they were going to share a brain, they should be on first-name basis, making some sense. Mirio, waking up with a yawn beside him, brought Tamaki out of his thoughts, and the two of them began to get up and ready for the day. He wasn't sure what Deku-Sensei had said to Mirio, but he was glad that Mirio was starting to make steps to recover. Tamaki knew Mirio wasn't better and that he wouldn't be for a long time, But Mirio wasn't hiding away in his room anymore, and even came with them to watch them train every once in a while. Mirio would be joining them again today, and was going to attempt to get back into training for being a hero again. While Mirio was going to talk with Recovery Girl and Deku-Sensei about a training plan that would be more suited to him. He could see that Mirio still had some unease over the idea, and Tamaki told him that he should bring Miyake along with him. Even if he trusted Deku-Sensei's judgment to a fault, Miyake would be a very reassuring presence to be there for him and call out any underhandedness. Mirio decided to do that since there really was something comforting about having some that big there by your side. Arriving at U8, Nijire was waiting for him and hugged them both as soon as she saw them, happily chatting with Mirio as the three of them walked over to the main building. Miyake and Haruki-sensei were waiting for them at the entrance. Nijire gave Mirio one last hug, and then Haruki-sensei lead him and Nijire away to get started on their meditation part of their training. "How was your morning?" Haruki-sensei asked them before settling down by a tree. "It was great, Haruki-sensei. I was actually able to eat while just kicking my feet today." Nijire jubilantly told her while he settled down, right by Haruki-sensei. Nijire choosing to hover with her quirk, since that was the only way to stay in place to meditate. "That's great for you, Hato-chan. Now, why don't you both close your eyes and focus on the calm that comes with your space and inheritance?" Haruki-sensei instructed them both. Tamaki's closed his eyes, trying his best to block out the sounds around them. "And breathe with me, in on 5, out in 10, and repeat." Haruki-sensei began the usual breathing exercise they always start out on. It wasn't the same level of relaxation that came from the mind space, but Tamaki thought that it might finally start working to help him calm his nerves. And it was in a way. In fact, he could even feel the floating sensation he got from the waters today as his muscles loosened up. "Hey, Jiki," Nijire said, and he hummed back, wondering why she suddenly was talking with him now. "I'm going to take your hands, okay?" Nijire told him. Oh, that explained why she spoke up instead of humming like always. Tamaki held out his hands for her to take. "Thank you, Jiki. Now can you open your eyes?" Nijire asked. Tamaki frowned, confused but complied. Nijire was right in front of him, and there was something slightly off about the main building behind her. "Jiki, can you focus on me for a moment? I need to tell you something super-duper important right now." Nijire said, bring his attention back to her. Nijire carefully interlocked their fingers in one hand before telling him what she needed to say. "You're floating in the air right now." Tamaki's mind hadn't quite processed her words, but he instinctively tried to look down, but one of Nijire's hands was quick to stop his mistake. "Whoa, no. No looking down. Just keep your eyes on me, Jiki." Nijire told him as panic started to settle in his heart. Hey, Jiki, calm down, breathe with me. We're floating, that's okay. We've floated before, and we are going to be fine. Nijire softly told him, rubbing her thumb on the back of the hand she was still holding. Tamaki tried his best to keep his breathing even, but that was pretty strong to do knowing that his feet were nowhere near the ground right now. "Jiki, we are okay. We are just floating like in the mind space right now. This is nothing we haven't done before," Nijire said to reassure him. Tamaki whimpered, shaking his head. This wasn't like floating in the ocean at all. "Hey, Jiki, you trust me, right?" Nijire asked him. Tamaki nodded. "Then trust that no matter what happens next, I'll catch you okay. I've used my quirk to float hundreds of times before, and I won't ever let you hit the ground. Never ever." Nijire promised him. That actually made his heart race less. He'd seen Nijire train her quirk to float for hours, and had floated with it every time they meditated. "See, that's good, Jiki. This is going to be fun. We're going to float together for a while and wait for Deku-Sensei." Nijire told him with a grin. "Hey, do you want to try dancing up here? You won't have to worry about stepping on my feet up here," Nijire suggested suddenly. Tamaki knew she was just trying to distract him, but he was willing to let take any distraction he could get at the time. "Great. Let's waltz then, Jiki," Nijire said. Bring him closer, so she could put their hands in the right places for a waltz, as he straightened out his legs, and then when they began slowly spinning, Tamaki buried his head in her shoulder. Nijire didn't say anything and just began humming loudly for him while he tried to calm down. Nana, upon seeing Amajiki and Nijire using her quirk through Yagi, gasps with excitement as she watches her grandbabies using her quirk. Nana, sweetly, my grandbabies. Amajiki has a fear of heights, which is now very obvious. Nana, panicked, my grandbabies. Coming to a bar was not Valentine's idea of relaxing after a long week at work, but he swore to whatever vengeful spirit was out there and watching him that if he didn't have something to take the edge off, he'd be likely to shoot someone at the office, which, considering it was one of their legal fronts, would not be in his best interest. Most people would not understand why Valentine's stress would lead to a shootout in the workplace. But then again, most people were not the right hand of one Yuri Morozov, leader of the Russian Vipers, oldest mafia that was still in a great deal of power to grace the earth. Something that was much more involved than the average secretary position of scheduling meetings and handling phone calls, or even just the stuff people assumed the mafia did, such as doing hits when Morozov asked him to. No, Morozov was a publicly known rich man that ran so many businesses on top of the Russian Vipers that Valentine paid a team just to help him manage everything. So, Valentine was also publicly known as his personal assistant and had to manage at least 50 different large companies on top of the international dealings that the Vipers had. And unlike with the Vipers, where Valentine could shoot the brain-dead morons around him or break someone's fingers for bothering him with unimportant CRP, he couldn't do the same in the above-board businesses. So, for the last week, he also had to deal with a new hire for Spirited Co.'s sales manager being nothing short of a beach to himself because he wasn't even half of her age, constantly insisting that he was a nepotism hire and being snide about him being a college dropout. Which she was right about. He hadn't finished college, and the degree he attempted to get wasn't even related to business in the first place. He was only in this position because Morozov put him in it. That did not mean that he wasn't sick of the woman's whining and bullying of the staff without college degrees, or who she thought was too young for their title. Like Kiryu, whom she had been trying to sabotage deals and keep him working on lower dealings. Naturally, this meant that Valentine needed to find someone to replace her soon, and he had been digging through a ton of files on replacements on top of everything else he was working on. So yes, Valentine had Deanwell earned himself a drink at some no-name bar, and he would have happily enjoyed said drink if someone hadn't decided to approach him. "Fancy seeing you here, hard eyes," the person dryly commented. Considering he was the only person on this side of the bar counter, it was clearly directed at him, and Valentine turned to see just who he had to deal with now, only to be somewhat surprised to see Dobby of all people. Sure, this bar wasn't that far from the south side, but it didn't quite seem like the place Dobby would be interested in grabbing a drink from. Then again, this wasn't the kind of bar that he liked either, so that was hardly an argument for why Dobby couldn't either. Dobby apparently took his silence as permission to sit in the stool next to him and flag the bartender for a drink. "Give me a necromancer. Put it in a shot glass with a salt lick," he told the woman before fishing out his fake ID. The bartender looked it over before going off to fetch him wherever a necromancer was, and Dobby turned back to him. "You had a long day too, hard eyes?" Dobby asked rhetorically. Valentine huffed back. "Try a long week," Valentine admitted, some of his accent slipping through his Japanese, letting his head rest on one of his hands. Dobby was clearly here for more than a drink, most likely looking for information on something he couldn't ask Morozov's son for. The boy liked to see the best in everyone, but he had no such biases coloring his vision of the man across from him. Dobby certainly had some kind of mental miswiring. He wasn't an expert in the field, and that wasn't the medicine he'd been studying in college, so he wouldn't label Dobby's thinking, but it certainly leaned towards the same vein as sociopathic or psychopathic. Valentine had seen plenty of both those sorts in his work, and Dobby's eyes weren't that far off. "I can only imagine," Dobby replied, just as the bartender came back with his drink, Dobby grabbing and sipping it with his right hand, making the woman uncomfortable, and she moved to stand at the other end of the counter. To be fair to the bartender, Valentine doubted many would be able to stand watching the bare muscles of Dobby's arm move around. Valentine, though, found himself watching every twitch of muscle, and with some honestly morbid curiosity. Sue him. Dobby's arm was some of his best work, considering they were able to keep the man's right arm at all after the damage he did to himself. "Cut the CRP, and tell me what you want, Dobby," Valentine told the enforcer. Dobby huffed. "What? Two dudes can't enjoy a drink together?" Dobby teasingly asked, and Valentine fixed him with a look. Dobby scoffed, raising his hands. Fine, I've got some questions for you," Dobby confessed, sounding all put upon and even rolling his eyes. "Ones you couldn't ask Deku?" Valentine questioned, just a bit miffed that Dobby was disrupting his break for something like this. Nah, I know you guys don't tell the Took everything for plausible deniability and all that CRP. Dobby answered, waving his right hand with some confidence he wouldn't hit anything with it. Valentine sighed and dragged his hand down his face. Fine. What do you want to know? Valentine relented. Your boss had something to do with my SPRM donor dropping to 5th, didn't he? Dobby stated more than guessed. Valentine nodded. It hadn't been strong to convince people to vote for Hawks as the favorite. Most in the districts knew Hawks was one of Deku's, and of course they adored the hero that constantly defended Morozov's precious son. The Vespas only asked people to come vote, and a good chunk of the districts with legal ID had come out, which of course caused a higher turnout, and that was before taking the legal members of the Vespa family's votes into account either. Figures, was that part of the Took's plan? Dobby questioned. No. The future head of the Vespas chose to do it independently, since having him at a lower rank would make protecting him even harder for the commission when it comes time to bring him to trial. Valentine answered, shrugging his shoulders. The biggest part they played in the plan was asking their workers to vote for Hawks and to produce IDs for those without legal ID for one reason or another. Also makes him easier to bump off if he ain't the decade's old number 2 anymore, right? Dobby commented, twirling his glass, rattling the 3 salt licks inside. Valentine frowned and raised a questioning eyebrow towards Dobby. Killing your father would be pathetically easy. Even Deku could do it with a pocket knife. But he doesn't want your father simply dead, and neither do you. Valentine responded, then sipped at his whiskey sour. Dobby looked back at him. With cold eyes, his mouth pulled back with a sneer. Valentine was reminded of an old saying, of something being so cold it burned. That saying would probably fit Dobby very well as he leaned into his. I'm pretty sure I want that son of a beach dead. Such a look would have successfully intimidated most people. If all it took was a harsh look and some words being snarled at him to break composure, then Valentine would have been killed off years ago considering his line of work. No, I've seen that look before. It isn't the look of someone that wants another person dead and buried. Valentine told Dobby. A slight rise in the heat around them, tipping Valentine off that Dobby was about to argue, but Valentine continued to speak. Dobby, you have the eyes of someone that wants to see someone suffer beyond measure for what they've done to you and your family. Valentine said, keeping his voice level. A bitter chuckle came from Dobby, and he tilted his head as he asked, is there a difference? Valentine hummed to himself, twirling his own half-full glass of liquor, looking away from Dobby, and then looking back at Dobby from the corner of one eye. As someone who's done both, I can assure you there are many worlds of difference between merely killing someone and actually having your revenge on them. Valentine answered. Oh, Dobby replied, the man's interest clearly piqued, and he leaned in, enlighten me then, hard eyes. Dobby challenged, a vicious smirk on his face. Valentine huffed, looking back to the bartender still staying far from their side of the bar, and that no one was listening to their little conversation, before resting his chin on the back of his hand. My first kill, the one that makes you a made man, so to speak, to use the pre-court term, was my own backstabbing mother that sold me to a rival group as a qualified doctor to get out of her debt to them. Valentine began to tell Dobby with a scoff. He hadn't even finished his first semester in the medical school that the beach forced him to get into, because, God forbid, he tried to be anything but a doctor like everyone else in their respectable family. Not when he had a perfect quirk for being a doctor like everyone else. I put the muzzle directly between her eyes as she bawled them out, then shot her point blank. Watched her brain and skull paint the wall after pulling the trigger. Valentine detailed for him, his mind going back to how his ever-so-proud mother spent her last seconds on the planet pleading with her screwed-up son not to end her miserable life. But honestly, watching that pathetic woman beg on her knees will never compare to how it felt taking my sister's life a month later. Valentine said, leaning towards Dobby, their noses almost touching. I made sure to rip every single thing she took joy in from her before I killed her. Got her fired and ruined her career. Got her husband to divorce her, and made sure that none of her 3 kids would ever want anything to do with her. Valentine gleefully recounted under his breath with a cruel smirk of his own on his face, noting how Dobby's heart rate was steadily increasing. I even made her question her own sanity before I forced her to knees and told her she was about to die just like our mother did. And let me tell you, Dobby, Valentine paused watching Dobby lick his lips. There will never be anything more satisfying than how utterly broken she looked before I put a bullet between her eyes, with her knowing that even if she begged me not to, she would have nothing because I made sure to raze everything she loved to the ground. Valentine informed Dobby before tilting his head. So, tell me, Dobby, Valentine said, teeing up a question he fully knew the answer to. Do you still want your father just dead? Or do you want to watch him spiral into total madness as everything he ever worked for is ripped away from him, one by one? Dobby, instead of answering, proceeded to grab his tie with his right hand and instead asked him, better question for you, hard eyes, your place or a hotel? A wicked glint to his turquoise eyes in the low lighting. Valentine considered Dobby's offer. Someone that was turned on by him, describing how he tormented and murdered his family, was almost certainly a glaringly red flag. But then again, as he let his eyes travel up and down Dobby's body, Valentine had to admit that Dobby likely wouldn't be a bad lay. One night with Dobby wouldn't kill him. Valentine placed down enough money to cover a round at the bar and freed his tie from Dobby's hand. Hotel, now get your butt in my car before I change my mind, Valentine told him as he dragged Dobby out of the bar with him, the other man not fighting in the slightest. You don't have to tell me twice, hard eyes, Dobby replied, clearly amused and smirking as he kept up with Valentine. Geeton returning from work after a long day. God, my boss is a pain in the butt. Dobby, having broken in to make his hangover his uncle's problem. Don't worry about that beach. I've already dealt with it. Geeton facepalms. Dobby, you can't threaten my boss. Dobby scoffs. Who said anything about threats? I'm just going to sleep with her boss and have him fire her. Geeton takes a deep breath. Dobby, no. Dobby, already texting Valentine for a but call. Too late, and you're welcome. Geeton internally screaming and nopes off to his room. Dobby, by the way, you're out of milk. Nao Mesa watched with Toshinori as both Deku and Hato gently coaxed down Amajiki from where he had floated above. Knowing how anxious the boy was from their meetings, Nao Mesa felt bad for the boy and Toshinori's mentor Nana. They had been told to expect one of the past wielder's quirks to pop up sometime soon, with how Amajiki's quirk was speeding up their body's acclimation to one for all. And Nana's quirk was probably the nicest of the quirks that could have popped up, since it was the one that would be the most familiar to them and have the fewest consequences for them if it came to the surface. Toshinori looked on sadly, his mouth opening to say something before closing it with a sigh and hand covering his face. The expression on it was one that Nao Mesa could come to recognize as the past user saying something that Toshinori would refuse to tell him about later. Nao Mesa gently pat Toshinori's shoulder. Don't take this so strong, Nana. I'm sure once Amajiki gets used to float, he'll love it. Nao Mesa said, hoping it would help Nana a little. Toshinori huffed a moment later and placed his hand over Nao Mesa's. Nana appreciates your words and will appreciate them even more later, but Nana is a bit busy trying to strangle Banjo at the moment. True, Toshinori informed him, slightly bemused. Nao Mesa wondered what Banjo had said that time to cause that, but shook his head. He was probably better off not knowing. He was still wrapping his head around that when talking now, he was not just speaking with Toshinori since his friend had made contact with the previous users, but he tried his best to keep it in his mind. Do you want to go and try to help get Amajiki down? Nao Mesa asked, only to watch as Toshinori's eyes fell to the ground, and he hugged himself. I would not be the right person to try that. They are not that comfortable with me yet. True, Toshinori softly explained before his eyes sadly went back to Amajiki and his hands tightened on his arms. Besides, I still need to work on not running off to help every time, especially since I won't be a full-time hero anymore. True, Toshinori painfully admitted. Nao Mesa sighed and looked over to his friend with a heavy heart. He knew that not being able to help was internally killing Toshinori. It always had to some degree. However, there was a new and much darker reason for that need to help than Nao Mesa thought was behind it. The exact psychology of it would probably escape him, but the deep urge to help to the point it becomes no longer a longing, but a deeply seated need within themselves forcing them to act. It was one that he knew and understood well. Nao Mesa likely wasn't as plagued by that need as Toshinori, but he did get caught up in it to the point he felt like he was choked by it. The lie about his quirk was one he told every day because of it. He didn't know how it worked. It would probably take a bunch of medical tests to ever explain it, but as long as there was nicotine in his system, he almost couldn't be lied to. Both of his parents had been heavy smokers, and he had picked up the habit himself from them in his teenage years, unintentionally at first by chewing his parents' nicotine gum and eventually smoking himself in high school. Because of those things, he never even knew his quirk needed nicotine to work until he tried to quit in his 20s and was horrified when his ability to tell truth from lies seemed to disappear until he picked up another cigarette. Naomasa knew that he should have updated his quirk's information once he figured out that his quirk wasn't continuous, but he hadn't. If he did, then he wouldn't be able to use his quirk to help investigate and expose criminals. He couldn't stop himself from shuddering at the thought of how many awful people that could be walking around free if he couldn't use his quirk to put them away. So, Naomasa would never begrudge Toshinori for having that same need consuming him, even if it wasn't healthy with how much his friend overdid it. Instead, he smiled towards Toshinori. "Then you're off to a good start, Toshinori." Naomasa told his friend, "You were able to see that you might not be the best person for this, and that's already a big step," he added. Toshinori smiled, sadly, but smiled nonetheless at him. "Thank you, Tsukachi," Toshinori replied before his eyes went back to Amajiki, the boy back on the ground and currently hugging a large rock. Hato and Midoriya comforting the boy. The two of them sighed relieved. "I think it would be okay for you to go over to them now," Naomasa pointed out. "You figured out how to use float pretty well, and Amajiki would appreciate some help either from yourself or Nana." Naomasa elaborated. Toshinori uncharacteristically hesitated in going off to help and was about to say something, but Naomasa spoke up first. "Go on, Toshinori. You need to bond with them, and you can't do that from a distance," he told the man, elbowing him gently and then motioned for him to go over to them already. Toshinori took a deep breath, then began to walk forward, no doubt with the past users giving him a pep talk within his head. Hopefully, Toshinori wouldn't default to his interacting with fans' voice and just tried to be himself. When he wasn't trying to be all might, he could be quite down to earth, and Amajiki would no doubt be more appreciative of that over the loud and near boastful version of Toshinori. His phone vibrated, and he took it out of his pocket, seeing that the person calling him was Tamakawa. DM in it. He thought, knowing that there would be only one reason for why his partner would be calling him at this moment. Naomasa accepted the call. Tsukachi speaking, he stated automatically. "Sorry for calling you on your day off." True Tamakawa apologized, and he knew that his partner really meant that quirk or no, since the last time he chose to take time off was years ago. "But there's been another victim, and the chief wants you over in Kumamoto as soon as possible," True Tamakawa explained to him, and Naomasa pinched the bridge of his nose. "Tamakawa, I know this case is important, but my skills won't be of any more help." Naomasa tried to protest, not wanting to leave Toshinori to deal with all of this on his own, but Tamakawa interrupted him. "The victim is still alive, Tsukachi." True Naomasa froze. "They survived?" Naomasa asked in disbelief. He remembered the other bodies well, and the idea of someone surviving that, even a hero, was they were found last night. The damage wasn't as bad as the 3 victims before, so the victim wasn't connected at first, but they're awake now, and the person they described attacking them matches up with our witness's sketch of the killer. True Tamakawa elaborated for him. "And the chief wants me to interview them, right? All right, I'll be there as soon as I can." "Which hospital were they taken to?" he asked, walking towards the gates. This could be the break in the case they needed. Out of the 5 kills before now, this would be the first person to have actually survived and would have information that they didn't have before now. "Yamaguchi Hospital. I've already booked a hotel nearby for us, and I'll meet you there." True Tamakawa answered before Naomasa hung up. He'd apologize for that later. He was sure that Tamakawa would understand. But he should at least tell the others that he was leaving too, so he shot a quick text to Toshinori and Nizu about being called in. He had let Toshinori drive him today, so Naomasa was quick to get himself a ride and used his phone to find the best way to Yamaguchi as fast as he could. He would not be able to make it before the sun set, but that would be fine. He would be able to speak with Tamakawa about the newest victim's case. A young and popular heroine had been the most recent victim, the Starfall heroine. Nebulosa had been found in an alley by one of her fans after they had recognized the background of her unexpected live stream. Indeed, as Tamakawa had been right about her injuries not being as bad as the heroes killed before now. The damage was still bad enough that the young woman would undoubtedly be forced to retire from heroics, though. There had been a lot of damage done to the woman's back. Her face had similarly been mutilated with the former, likely leaving the nerves on her spine severed, and the removal of one of her eyes due to the latter. And that was before taking into account what had been done to her right leg. From just above her knee, the leg had been fully separated from her body. And if Nebulosa hadn't used her quirk to cauterize her leg and back, there was a good chance that she would have bled out long before someone would have found her. After reading the files, Naomasa settled to get a couple hours of sleep before heading to the hospital first thing in the morning with a fresh nicotine patch and a cup of coffee. The exact details of the mutilation had not been fully disclosed in the file Tamako got, so Naomasa felt rather justified in wincing once he saw Nebulosa. The woman was laying on her belly instead of her back, and on the side of her face, he could see it was clear one of her eyes had been removed if the large amount of gaze on her face was anything to go by, though her mouth was free of the same dressing. Heavy bruising was there too. In her back, half of her was covered by one of the blankets the hospital provided, but the rest was a large burn that made him a touch queasy to look at. It covered most of her back, and the red, white and black patch of skin had a distinctly glossy look that made Naomasa glad to be on the other side of the glass from her. "Nebulosa," he said while pressing the intercom, and Nebulosa's singular yellow-orange I went over to stare at him as she turned her head around to look at him. "I am Detective Tsukachi, and I have been asked to interview you about what happened to you recently." Naomasa introduced himself. Nebulosa flinched and looked down and away from him. "What else do you need to know?" she hoarsely questioned him, her chin resting on a pillow. Naomasa hated this part of the job. Forcing someone to relive trauma was always awful, no matter how necessary it was at times. "I would like to hear a full account of what happened to you that night once you started Pa Dash," Naomasa tried to explain. "Do you really need some shitty report right now?" Nebulosa shouted back at him, using her arms to push herself slightly upright, whipping her head around fully to glare at him with her one good eye, tears building up in the corners of it. "I'm still trying to get over the fact I only have one eye now. I knew they weren't going to be able to save my leg. I had to burn the stump just so I wouldn't bleed out. But then I wake up here, and one of my eyes are just gone." "True," she continued to shout, pointing towards her missing eye with her bandaged hand. Then with the same hand, she pointed towards her legs that were under her blanket. "And I can't even so much as feel either of my legs. I've been trying and goddamn trying, but not even AF twitch." Then I had to see my back dash. True, Nebulosa broke into sobs before burying her face in her pillow and weeping loudly with body shaking from it. "I'm sorry I did dash," Naomasa tried to say, but Nebulosa just threw one of the small stuffed toys on her bedside table at the glass. "Just leave me alone, you," but she choked out between sobs. The noise obviously attracted the attention of one of the burn ward's nurses, and the man was quick to escort him away from Nebulosa's room. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to upset your patient." Naomasa's words felt like ash on his tongue. Even with the incomplete report of the damage, he should have known how broken up the young woman would be, and that he should have pushed back more on getting a victim's report so soon. "Normally, I would probably chew your butt out for that SHD. True, the goat horn man told him. "But considering she's been like that with everyone since she woke up, I can't really put her meltdown on you." True, the nurse confessed, running a hand through his hair. "You should have heard her an hour ago. She was cursing out one of the interns for offering her water." True, the man recounted. Naomasa merely nodded. He had heard that Nebulosa had a temper through the grapevine of hero scandals, and Naomasa guessed there was more truth to it than he knew. Still, this was a fairly horrible thing that happened to her, and Naomasa couldn't imagine being in Nebulosa's place, that he'd be all too polite to someone asking him questions about the worst night of his life so soon. "I think it would be better for me to come back another day to speak with her," Naomasa told the man, who just nodded. "Just try and arrange it with her doctor first," the man said before leaving Naomasa on his own and going back to wherever he was doing before now. Naomasa watched him go, then sighed deeply and began his walk to the nurse's desk to try and get Nebulosa's doctor's name and contact details. "Oh, come on, Jiki. We can do this. Floating is like riding a bike. You'll never forget," Nijire promised, trying to encourage her friend to join her out on the mat. "And if you do forget for some reason, Deku-Sensei and Aizawa-sensei made sure that every inch of this gym is covered in this soft padding, so we won't get hurt no matter what." Nijire added when Jiki still wasn't letting go of Miyake's tail. Honestly, both of them had done a very good job making every surface of the gym covered in the soft foam, and they even covered the gym equipment too and added some aerial stuff for them to try out, if they ever got high enough to use it. Jiki had unfortunately taken to clinging on to either herself or Miyake after they got him down the first time, even though he had only started floating off a couple of other times. Her friend was absolutely terrified he'd accidentally float off if he didn't hold on to someone or something. When the only response she got was a croak of sorts, Nijire's shoulders slumped, and she scratched her head trying to think of anything else she could do to convince Jiki to come out and join her for training float. She had already made some progress. Manipulating her own energy was something she was already used to doing in her everyday life. Sure, it was a little different trying to move under float's magnetism, but it would have been ultimately more fun if she had spent more energy while doing it. Amajiki, would you feel more comfortable if you ate something you could use to move around with while floating? Yuyu asked after a few seconds. Jiki bit his lip then after thinking about it, then nodded. Yay! Nijire cheered, clapping her hands. Okay. What things we could get for Jiki to move around with? We could send Masao-chan out to grab a feather, or maybe we can ask if Yagi-san still has some compound chicken. Nijire supposed, pacing in a circle, because having those would let him grow a pair of wings that he could use to move with some certainty. Jiki had used wings before, and they were just removing the problem of gravity he normally faced when it came to liftoff. I can run down to the corner shop and see if they have some grapes, so he can root himself to the ground like a balloon, Yuyu offered. Ooh, vines or tentacles would also be useful here. And Jiki would not have to go too high when he floated. They could get another curl of taffy from Ashan instead, and it would have the same result. And no, you don't have to do that. Jiki protested, and Yuyu placed a hand on his shoulder. Imajiki, don't worry about it. I've got plenty of pocket money, and I would feel much better helping you in some way. Yuyu told him, since they could easily see what Jiki's main problem with the idea would be. Jiki flushed, and his ears dipped. I know, but I was thinking a spider would be better, Jiki replied with his head ducked. Not my first idea, but if it's a spider you want, then we'll get you a spider, Jiki. There's probably a few up in the corners of the ceiling. Just give me a moment to find one. Nijire agreed, then shot up into the air, expelling some energy with her BRTH quirk to move to the corners. The ceiling was surprisingly clean of webs, but after prying open a vent she struck gold, and found a nice little spider for Jiki to eat, and she grabbed some webbing for good measure before coming back down. One spider, and some webbing for you, Jiki. Nijire happily presented her find to her friend. Jiki hesitated, likely because the spider was still squirming in her hand, so Nijire carefully sent a jolt of energy into the spider. The whole body spasming before twitching like most dead spiders did. Their problem solved. Thank you, Nijire. Jiki muttered before taking both and eating them. You turning away since she didn't have the same stomach they had. That was fine, though. Masao and Jiki could eat bugs and spiders with her. Once Jiki swallowed, he took a deep breath and then took hold of her hands, letting go of Masao's tail and following her out to the middle of the floor. Okay, Jiki, let's focus on turning float on and off first, Nijire said calmly as they stopped and stood holding each other's hands. I knew the basics for it since it wasn't too far off from my BRTH quirk, but this is going to be pretty new for you, and once you know how to turn it on and off, you'll be able to take a load off, Nijire instructed. So, first close your eyes. The calmer you are, the easier this will go for us, Nijire told him. Jiki, not needing more incentive to do so, did exactly that. Now, I don't know if you've eaten shark or electric eel before, Nijire said, waiting for Jiki's answer, which was a no, judging from how he shook his head. Well, I'll cross that off the metaphor list then, but either way you should feel a tingling of sorts under your skin. Nijire began to explain. It's kind of a buzz for me, but it might feel like a hum or a thrum for you. I want you to focus on it cause that'll be the magnetism of float you're feeling, Nijire told him. Jiki's face scrunched up as he concentrated. Found it? Jiki shakily admitted after a minute, causing Nijire to blink. Oh wow. You found it faster than I thought you would. Way to go, Jiki. Nijire praised him, and his ears turned red from embarrassment. Now that you found it, I want you to, well, twist it mentally, like you would a radio dial. Nijire tried to guide Jiki. Redirecting energy in any form was strong to explain to someone that hadn't done it before, and moving a radio dial sounded the closest to what she had always thought of when using float. Okay, Jiki nervously muttered, clearly uncertain about actually doing this even with all of their precautions. Do you want me to talk you through it? Like how Haruki-san does for our meditation. Nijire offered, and Jiki nodded his head. All right then, let's take one deep breath first, then focus on the pulse of float within yourself, she instructed him. Watching Jiki as he took a deep breath. Like how it feels almost like a second heartbeat with how it circulates throughout your body. Nijire told him as she let her own eyes closed. The buzz of float thrummed along with her own quirk under her skin, the two moving nearly in sync with each other. Count it with me, 1, 2. 1, 2. Nijire said, counting the seconds with her heartbeat, her mind being able to separate the two quirks with a rhythmic beat in her CHSD. Can you feel it, Jiki? Nijire asked after a couple of minutes. Yeah, he quietly answered, slightly calmer now from the counting. Good. Now we're going to focus on making float stronger by making that soft pulse louder so that we can hover a couple of feet. Nijire said, rubbing circles into the back of Jiki's hands after she heard him gulp. Now think about the pulse of float. Start with another deep breath, Jiki. Nijire instructed, and Jiki didn't hesitate to take another calming breath. Then, you're going to count with me down from 10. And with each number, we're going to take another deep breath, Nijire elaborated. Short breath in and long breath out. With each breath out, your body is going to feel lighter and lighter. Nijire explained to him. Are you ready? She asked. As I'll ever be, Jiki muttered. Okay. 10, 9, 8, Nijire counted along with Jiki, the buzz of float coming to the surface as it had before, the weight of her body decreasing with every exhale. 3, 2, 1. Now, Jiki, do you feel lighter? Nijire asked, opening her eyes. Watching him nod his head, then Nijire looked down to see that Jiki and she were hovering up in the air, thankfully only a couple of feet. Great, Jiki, we're floating now. Do you want to try moving around or just try turning float off? Nijire asked, making sure to just what Jiki was comfortable with. I want to stop, Jiki admitted, a bit shamefully. It's fine if you don't want to go bouncing off the walls like I did, Jiki. You're our shy little cannibalistic being, and we adore you no matter what. Nijire said slightly teasingly. Nijire, Jiki whined under his breath with bright red ears. Now we are going to count down again. Long inhale, short exhales. With every breath, our bodies are going to become heavier as float's energy becomes weaker. Repeat after me, Jiki. 10, Nijire told him, moving swiftly along and counting with Jiki until their feet reached the soft ground again. And 1. Since we are on the ground again, you feel okay opening your eyes? Nijire inquired. Jiki's eyes opened and Nijire beamed at him. You did fantastically, Jiki. You got up and down all on your own this time with a bit of guidance. Nijire praised the boy. Jiki smiled his usual lopsided smile back at her. Think you want to do it again, Jiki? Or would that be too much for you right now? Nijire questioned, tapping her foot to let out some of her energy. Jiki's eyes went down to her foot before he answered her. I could in a few minutes. Go let out some steam, he told her, letting go of her hands. Nijire huffed, bemused, giving him a quick hug, then moved a few steps away before kicking off the ground with a burst of energy from her BRTH quirk. Toshinori watched as both of the Ninths were playing around up in the air of the gym. It had taken a few days, but Amajiki had really come into float. He was still using his BRTH quirk to shoot webbing to help him move around, but he was comfortable to float up multiple meters away from the ground. Hato had turned using float into a game of tag of sorts, the two of them moving around the equipment attached to the ceiling and the lower obstacle course parts. Each time they tagged the other, there was laughter from Hato. "Aw, I wish I could have done that with someone when I was younger," Nana said wistfully. "I'm glad that your friend was right, Yagi," and told him next, and Toshinori nodded, smiling as Nijire made sure to let go of float for a moment to sharply dip in the air out of Amajiki's reach. Happy to see that the two of them were able to find some joy in wielding inheritance where most could not. For as much as inheritance had given to him, he could not say it had brought him the same mindless fun that it was currently bringing both Amajiki and Hato. They deserve to have some fun before we need to deal with Aoi, Yuchi warmly said. If we need to deal with Aoi, your kid's plan sounds mostly foolproof, Yuchi. Hikage pointed out. Toshinori privately hoped that they would drop the running comments of how Midoriya-kun was Yuchi's son. Somehow, before the Knights were able to enter the mind space fully. Nana huffed, and Toshinori felt her phantom hand ruffle his hair. Toshi, those are my grandbabies over there, and they shall adore their cousin, and Nijire will help us make up for all the birthdays Yuchi and I missed. Nana told him, clearly bemused, while Toshinori sighed into his hand. Wouldn't that make Yuchi your nephew? In questioned. Yes. Nana confirmed, and given the squawk from Yuchi, she most likely tackle-hugged Yuchi in the mind space. He is now one of my babies. Nana declared. I am centuries older than you. Yuchi protested, embarrassed, no doubt. Don't care. You're one of my babies now. Nana replied. Toshinori was glad he didn't have to be there to see what was going on in the mind space. He definitely would have been dragged into the hug by Nana. Wait, is Yagi a dad now? Because I don't think he's responsible for his own health. Much less could be for two kids with such different personalities. Hikage pointed out, and Toshinori almost choked up some BLD. He was what now? Of course he is, he just doesn't have main custody and is the fun weekend's dad since he's terminal, and they can always go to their cousin Izuku for help. Nana proudly explained. Nana, no. Toshinori tried to say under his breath to avoid getting looks from the others. Nana, yes, you and Yuchi are my babies now and are giving me appealing grandbabies. Deal with it. Nana cheekily told him, and Toshinori buried his heads in his head as both he and Yuchi groaned. Katsuki grumbled as he aggressively tapped his foot, resisting the urge to check his phone for the fourth time in the last 5 minutes. It was pretty late for him to be up, and he had asked Izuku to come and meet up with him to talk about some important crap. Things seemed to have calmed down since Izuku texted him about castrating someone, and he didn't want to put this shit off any longer than was necessary. He was currently waiting outside, so Izuku was going to be along soon, which Izuku did, a little out of breath and looking for all the world like the worried puppy as he rushed over to him. What's wrong? Izuku asked immediately. Katsuki scared and began to sign. Why the fuck do you act like the world's ending when you get a "we need to talk about something important" text? Izuku flushed and rubbed the back of his neck. Sorry, just you don't really text me like that out of the blue. Izuku apologized bashfully. Well, he'd have to give the fucker that point. He normally waited to see him on Thursdays when they needed to talk about something. That's because we need to talk about something important, and I wanted to give you time to get your shit together for a dumbass. Katsuki signed back. Talk about what? Izuku asked, somewhat confused. Do your friends know what I did to you? Katsuki questioned, unsurprised when Izuku's shoulders hunched in, and he avoided Katsuki's eyes. No. Izuku quietly muttered back. Katsuki scared, shaking his head. Izuku had become much better at holding him accountable for his shit and respecting himself as a person, but he was still pussy-footing around their crappy past. Unintentionally or not, Izuku was trying to bury the past, which would have been fine if their past hadn't been more toxic than a barrel of nuclear waste. You can't keep that crap from them. Katsuki signed back. I know, Izuku admitted, rubbing one of his arms, then leaned on the same wall he was and let his head hit the wall as he stared up at the sky above. I know they should know. They need to know to make a fully informed decision of whether they want to hang out with you, Izuku said a minute later. Katsuki could practically hear the reasons why Izuku hadn't told them, even if Izuku knew better than to say them. I just didn't want them to think you were still a bad person, Katsuki. I wanted them to get to know you first so they could see you're different now, Katsuki. Katsuki grabbed Izuku's shoulder and shook it to make him look at him. I'm going to tell them next Sunday. Do you want to be there or not, dumbass? Katsuki asked and watched as Izuku's face fell. Yeah, I'll be there, Katsuki, Izuku told him and began to hug himself. Thank you for telling me first, Izuku muttered, his mind clearly already working to do damage control for the future shit show that was going to go down. I told Patty and Patchy too. They wanted to come, but I told them to fuck off and stay home. Katsuki informed him. Are you sure? Izuku asked, concerned. Katsuki scared and signed. If one of your friends tries to fuck me up, then it's just that bitch karma catching up with me, and you'd pull them off before they screwed me up that bad. Izuku sighed. Of course I would. He agreed. I just hope Yukai doesn't try to knife you, Izuku commented. Katsuki frowned, but ultimately did think that Newton fucker would absolutely knife his ass if she had one on her. He'd deserve it, but Newton did not need that crap on her record. Katsuki already had his plans for the conversation made. He'd texted Izuku and his friends to meet at his house and go out into the woods nearby. It would be in a public place they knew somewhat and could leave easily. It would also not be too public, so they wouldn't have to worry about anyone seeing them attack him, which Katsuki was expecting at least one of them to punch him out for it. Most likely Newton fucker, since she would be the one with the balls to do it. Katsuki also had told his parents what he was going to do, and his old man had a first aid kit at the ready just in case. And as annoying as his hag was being when she hugged him, Katsuki did appreciate her offering to reset his nose if Newton fucker broke it. He'd also thought about how he was going to explain it all to them, including if he was going to be interrupted a lot by their questions. And to keep himself from blowing up at them, he blew up a few of the doll's potty made for him, to burn off some of his nerves. Katsuki knew what reaction he'd get, including the idea that it might go nuclear, and they would try to cut him off from Izuku, which would be shitty, but fully understandable considering how bad it all got. He was Izuku's main tormentor for almost a decade and had hurt Izuku in some pretty horrifying ways, all while being a total bastard to him for most of the time. If for whatever reason they weren't pissed off at him, he'd be the one to snap, because any decent person should be rightfully concerned and have some pointed questions about why they were still hanging out with each other. Izuku had come over early as well and hung out for a bit that morning, his own nerves being the obvious reason for him coming over, though he tried to pretend that he was much calmer about the whole thing. Thankfully, before Izuku lost his crap in worrying, his friends arrived and they happily greeted each other, all clearly excited to go out and have a walk around the woods. Though Katsuki was certain that Eldritch fucker had clocked this wasn't going to be a nice romp through the woods like some Disney movie. So, why'd you invite us out, Kat? You're not the friendliest alley cat, and not usually the one to get us to hang out. Hatrak asked, saddling up to him. Katsuki sked, shoving his hands into his pockets, because of course Izuku would befriend people that would notice a change in him. Just got some shit we need to clear out. Katsuki answered, making sure not to look anywhere in Izuku's direction when he spoke. He'd made progress to speak around Izuku, but he still couldn't look at him while talking or directly talk to him. That crap still felt too much like a loose cannon for him to try. Signing worked just fine, since he had been practicing it with others now. Hatrak nodded, cool. Hatrak said, then just continued walking around until Katsuki made all of them stop in one of the clearings, motioning for Izuku to know it was time, and Izuku was quick to move, so he was out of Katsuki's line of sight. Okay, you dumbass, there's some crap that we need to talk about, and to clear the fucking air, Katsuki told them, leaning back against a tree. What do you want to talk about? Newton asked, sitting on a rock, and paused from drinking her water bottle, likely thinking they were just taking a break. How much did that idiot actually tell you about me? Katsuki replied, jabbing a thumb over at Izuku, and saw the confusion cross the three faces. Mirio-kun told us that you two have been friends with each other for years, and that you've known each other forever. Eldritch answered for them. Katsuki groaned and pinched the bridge of his nose. We were, but they're more to our personal shit than that, Katsuki said before crossing his arms. I'm pretty fucked up in the head. I got ED from my hag. Katsuki informed them, and Hatrak held his hand up. Yes, Hatrak? Katsuki asked. I'm probably the odd one out here, but the fuck is E.D? Hatrak questioned like there are a lot of illness and mental crap, so I just want to be sure which of them you're talking about. Hatrak explained after a moment. Technically, it's officially known as intermittent explosive disorder, but me and the old hag dropped the vibe because it doesn't matter to us that much, and it boils down to our brains not being wired the same way, and that making us more likely to rage and have fits where we get violent. Katsuki explained for him. My old man and my hag have some bite and burn marks from when I've had fits and attacked them for trying to stop me from raging. Katsuki threw out to give them an example. Got it, I think? Hatrak replied, giving him a thumbs up to continue. The big problem with having a fucked up brain like mine is that when I'm stressed or someone winds me up, I will almost always lose my crap or get thrown into a fit, Katsuki told them. And I'm sure you can fucking imagine just how that would screw me up when I grew up in the same toxic place with this dumbass over there, Katsuki pointed out. He saw sympathy cross their faces, but Katsuki was quick to continue speaking. which made things worse, but I was already acting like a shithead to Izuku before then. Katsuki said, "When I heard Izuku was a two-toes, I was a little shit to him about it at first because I thought he broke his promise to me to become heroes together, and I was still a little bastard until my old man pulled me aside to correct me on some of the shit the adults were saying." Katsuki explained to them. Newton rubbed the back of her neck. "Well, you were pretty young then, and I kind of understand how you might have felt betrayed as a kid back then." Newton commented a bit uncomfortably. "I ain't finished, Newton fucker. Hold your tongue until I finish," Katsuki corrected. "If it was just me being a dumbass kid, I wouldn't have brought this crap up, but it wasn't just toddler shit I did to Izuku," Katsuki further informed them. "Because once I was over that, I got pissed with Izuku for not training with me and just messing around with his notebooks." Katsuki elaborated for them, watching them look a bit irritated over that comment, but Katsuki held his hand up. "Izuku's biggest strength is his brain, but if we were going to be heroes, especially if we were fighting a bigoted system that wouldn't let him fucking try, then he would need to be able to punch a bastard out too," Katsuki explained to them, getting some begrudging nods. "But all the dumbass did was write in those books. He didn't do shit to physically train himself, which annoyed me. So I tried to bait him into fighting with me just so he'd do some kind of training. I said a lot of crap to him to try and get him mad enough to punch me or something, and when that didn't work, I tried to force him to fight me," Katsuki detailed, clenching his arms. "You bullied him," Eldritch said, his eyes narrowed. Hatrak looked like he was about to tell Eldritch not to jump to conclusions, but Katsuki spoken up first. "Sure, as shit I did, and it all came to a head 3 years ago when I put his ass in the hospital with bone fractures and a TBI," Katsuki coldly informed them. Newton was immediately to her feet and shouted, "You did what?" looking furious. "Yukai dash," Izuku tried to defend him, but Katsuki held up his hand, something that wasn't helping how angry the three of them looked when Izuku immediately shut himself up. "Izuku, due to some twisted fucked up sense of loyalty to me, lied to everyone about the crap going down between us. And with no one knowing what I did aside from the negligence bigots at the school and our bastard classmates, the shit I was doing escalated until I was doing crap that could have killed him if I wasn't as careful," Katsuki flatly informed them. "Like, how could?" Hatrak began to sputter. "Because I was getting close to my breaking point after years and years of watching Izuku do nothing to make something of himself, and just spiraling deeper and deeper into his notebooks. I was starting to lose hope that he'd ever get out of the depressive slump that quack that told him he was a two-toes put him in," Katsuki told them, gritting his teeth. "You fuckers only knew the Izuku that left that shit behind him and started building up the red lights out of pure fucking spite and kindness. You didn't have to watch day by goddamn day as he wasted away, just letting everyone and their mother tear him apart." Katsuki spat venomously. "I did, and if I'm being honest, it scared me the hell out of me, as each day the boy I grew up with was losing everything that made him who he was and becoming someone I couldn't fucking recognize as he clung to those damn books." "Becoming someone?" Katsuki said before letting his head hang, the word hollow coming to his tongue and sitting on it painfully. He would never say that crap, not out loud, but that's what Izuku felt like back then. Like some hollow, mindless doll. Sometimes you could do anything to, and he'd still have the stupid fucking grin on his face. "I fucked up and lashed out, letting my frustration and fear hurt Izuku when I should have been his fucking rock and done more to protect his ass from all of the shitheads around us," Katsuki confessed with his head hung lower. "I used my quirk on him, kicked him while he was down, and probably caused more than one of his mental issues with all of the crap I did. I am a sick son of a bitch that got off easy for it, because I went to therapy and had a victim the law wouldn't give two shits about," Katsuki told them. "Why he still wants anything to do with my toxic ass, I don't know. Even though I ain't that same person anymore and won't ever let me be that bastard again, he shouldn't want anything to do with me," Katsuki said before lifting his head. "But I ain't about to let you idiots try and befriend me without knowing all of the shit that went down between us, or how much of a train wreck I am," Katsuki told the three, watching as they all looked at him. Hatrak seemed to be utterly lost and betrayed, looking as he looked between him and Izuku. Eldritch was silent and angry. Newton, on the other hand, was shaking in her anger, and the next second she was rushing over to him. And Katsuki made no attempt to protect himself from the swing of Newton's fist. The crack of bone echoing in the thicket while Katsuki fell to the ground, His hand went to hold his now broken nose that was pissing blood and hurt like a motherfucker. Newton tried to say, standing above him, but unable to finish. Katsuki looked back up to see Newton's hand held up in a fist and shaking, as if she was held back from giving him a second punch, before it was forcefully lowered and Newton turned away from him and stomped off into the woods. Eldritch and Hatrak quickly following her. Izuku hesitating and looking back to where he was sat on the ground holding his nose, before Izuku too was quick to follow after his friends. Katsuki sighed, then pushed himself back to his feet and started heading back to his apartment. At least he told them, "Thank you for joining us on this journey through what if Villain Deku became a teacher at U.A. We hope you found it as captivating as we did. A big thank you to Bloomerbill for creating such an engaging story. Don't forget to visit their profile on fanfiction.net for more fantastic works. The link is in the description below. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and subscribe to Zenin Fanfics for more intriguing explorations into fanfiction and fantasy. Your support helps us create more content like this, and we love hearing your thoughts and suggestions in the comment section. See you soon in the next video.